No, because I was pre-wig, so you had to
So you had to actually do your hair.
Yeah, I had to like sleep with like 90 pink rollers in my hair. Awful. Yeah. Tucked out in the morning.
So
Felt
what
like
was
a
your?
poodle.
You grew up in New Jersey,
In New York.
in New York.
Yeah, I danced in Carnegie.
It's true.
But it was helpful for her, so she said.
And when she read like everything, I only caught one thing or so. I mean, if you scroll through.
Again, have one or two mics that don't turn off.
Oh.
We'll make sure
Fun.
they are off, just so people are aware. Yeah. Hello. Your mic is not.
Carolyn's made by and has a live mic.
Yes. If anyone needs the lights up, I can turn them up, but this will help us get to sleep.
Well, not too soon then.
Extra light, like, so we're gonna experiment.
We'll be able to go to bed 15 minutes after we
Yes,
get home now.
Well, at least maybe we can get 1 a.m. time too.
And it looked like it's supposed to be managed. It's
Oh, really?
Yeah.
supposed to be kind of a full spectrum thing.
I guess at night you want more of the red or orange wavelength rather than the blue, and so even full spectrum has too much blue.
Well, there's some, it's supposed to look like something like that.
Yeah, so that would be 5,000 Kelvin, which still, sunlight would keep you awake.
Well, of course,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, it's 7:30, so let's get started. Caroline says she's going to be 5 to 10 minutes late. So Cindy or Wyatt, can you do roll?
Be glad to, Mayor. Ms. Connolly? Here? Is this one? Mrs. Scott?
Here.
Mr. Schneider? Ms. Underhill?
Oh, here.
And Mayor Hardy.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, first up, sanitary sewer testing.
Hi, and so I'll do a quick introduction. First, I will just note that all of the work session items for discussion tonight are really for discussion. And it's actually the consent items that are for requests to be scheduled for action at your next meeting. So our first item with the sanitary sewer capacity purchase briefing, Zach Bradley is joining us virtually, and he's going to give a presentation tonight on this issue. But I also just want to introduce Alan Dalton, who's been very important in terms of our analysis of our options. And I want to thank him for his work. And Andy Young has been very active in sort of helping the team sort of think through some of our responses to Fairfax County and help with this presentation as well. By way of introduction, and I'll turn it over to Zach in just a moment. On one hand, this is just a very straightforward sewer capacity purchase agreement. And with that, we've been in discussion with the county for 5 years or so, just to plan for the eventual purchase of capacity, noting the increased development that's been happening, particularly in the Trips Run sewer shed, which flows to Fairfax County. In May of last year, the county completed an assessment of their conveyance system. So there was a new injection into these discussions, and that is the management of peak flows that occur during high rain events. So that is a twist on this otherwise straightforward purchase agreement discussion with Fairfax County. So with respect to average daily flows, they have sufficient treatment capacity and conveyance capacity, and would be happy to sell us that capacity. The peak flows is an inflow and infiltration issue, which all sewer systems have to address, but the county has asked us for our allyship and also some compliance measures that we will manage our I&I more aggressively going forward with these purchase agreements. So that's what Zach's going to walk us through. This is briefing number 1. We plan to come back to the council in March with more detail and also more discussion of the financing of these purchases and managing the peak flow situation. Right now, we have a financing problem. We have, just purchasing this capacity is very expensive. But adding the peak flow conveyance management on top of it is right now a very significant financing challenge that we don't have all the answers to tonight. But come March, we want to do some more work on it, roll up our sleeves with finance, and try to work through some good options. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Zach, and look forward to tonight's discussion.
All right, thank you, Wyatt. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm not sure who's driving tonight, but we can go ahead and get started. All right, so the first slide, I won't go into detail. This is just kind of an outline of the upcoming items that was kind of organized. We can go ahead and jump to the next slide. All right, so this slide shows the Fairfax County sewer shed in yellow, the Arlington County sewer shed in green. As of today, the service areas do extend outside of the city into various different parts, primarily of Fairfax County. This is something that's been the case for a long time, and we'll get into why that's important a little bit later. But it does provide some challenges to us. Generally speaking, in the Fairfax County sewer shed, we're allotted 1 million gallons per day on the daily conveyance flow. And in the green Arlington area, we get 0.8 million gallons per day of the same daily conveyance flow. Next slide. So kind of the breakdown of the Fairfax County flow. We're allotted 1 million gallons per day. Fairfax County has offered to sell us 0.5 million gallons per day, which meets our needs through 2025. And then again, we would have an additional opportunity to purchase more capacity. But it does account for 1.5 million gallons per day, which gets us through the West Falls Church development, Founders Row, Washington and Broad, and then it has kind of I'll call it a contingency of sorts, if you will, for kind of ongoing background by right development. So this could be the recently rezoned T-zones. This could be tear down, rebuild of ongoing houses. It could be some by right commercial development within the city. And then of particular note, the last couple of years, we have been ever so slightly over our average allowable daily flow, which is kind of what has triggered this discussion with Fairfax County. So right now, every month we're using between 1.01 and 1.02 million gallons a day. So slightly over. Then at the bottom of the column on the right, we get into kind of some of our needs by 2028. West Falls Phase 1B and 2 are on here. There would be some other developments that would happen in that time, which would trigger an additional capacity purchase then. Kind of some of the immediate costs that we're grappling with and looking through how to finance. The 500,000 gallon purchase cost us about $9.3 million. That was a study that was initiated by Fairfax County. We've known that dollar per gallon use for a few months now. And then we've recently come to a rough estimate on the flow equalization basin of around $10 million. I do want to stress that is an estimate, and staff believes that is a worst case scenario as of right now. So we have a total expenditure by 2025 of around $19.3 million. Next slide. So this is just a quick outline of...
Can I just ask a question? Is that a one-time $9.3 million or an annual $9.3 million?
The 9.3 is a one-time.
One-time.
So that,
Okay.
yes, that would entitle us to the additional 500,000 gallons in perpetuity. That would be ours.
Okay, thanks.
And sorry, I don't know what flow equalization means. Is that something you'll explain later, or can you briefly explain?
Yes, I have a slide on that where I'll get into more detail. So yes, just bear with me. So this slide is really just going over a timeline, shows when we gave the county a formal request to purchase the 500,000 gallon additional capacity. That dates back to December 2021, so a little over 2 years ago, along with various milestones that we've hit. Back in May of last year, that's when the county first expressed that with our peak flow rates that we're seeing, they wanted to limit us to 0.25 MGD, which was half of our original ask. Since then, we've worked through those issues with them. They're willing to sell us the 500,000 gallons again with some peak flow restrictions, as Wyatt mentioned earlier. So if we go to the next slide. I do just quickly want to define daily versus peak flow. So daily flow is the average flow the plant receives from the city over a 30-day period. And peak flow is the highest amount of flow seen in any one rolling hour period. So we have meters that on the Fairfax County side that measure the flow into the city and then out of the city. And then the difference between those two is how much sewage we as a city are generating. And any one particular hour during the day can be the peak. So a couple of graphics on here. On the left is it's an infill and inflow. You might hear me refer to it as I&I later on in the presentation. But inflow is quite important. Those are downspouts, direct connections, sump pumps, floor drains, things like that are piped directly into the sewer main. Inflow is cause cracking, joint separation, kind of deterioration of the sewer mains. Those will be more important at a later slide. I think the most important graphic to look at is the one on the right. And I think this does a pretty decent job explaining daily flow versus peak flow. So your daily flow is kind of the average of the green and the blue. So the blue represents peaks and lows of usage during the day. Green is kind of general infiltration through groundwater. And then your peak is the rain event. So if you're getting a lot of inflow through downspouts and sump pumps, you can see how quickly that peak can spike on here. If we go to the next slide. So some of our solutions for 2025. And one thing I want to emphasize very briefly, our peak flows are a longstanding issue. Many of these issues date back pre-2014, which is the oldest data we have is about 10 years. And we know the issues go back before that. So this is not anything particularly new or caused by any particular effort or policy in the last several years. But the general idea is we want to reduce those flow rates. Again, that's kind of I&I based. What we have seen is that our peak flows jump significantly in a couple of our sub sheds within the Fairfax County during rain events from those inflow areas, right? Again, downspouts, sump pumps, anything like that. We know in the Tinner Hill subshed, very few issues. Peak flows don't jump that much. It actually jumps very little during even the July 2019 rain event. The Cedar Lane subshed does have some issues. If you recall the graphic on the right slide with the I&I, we have relined 90% of our sewer mains. That was primarily focused on structural integrity of the sewer mains, making sure they're free and clear. As a side benefit, that also seals up any joint separations or cracks that are relating and contributing to specifically that inflow piece of I&I. Over the next 12 to 18 months, our goal is to finish lining those sewer mains as well as lining the manholes to stop any infiltration, so that we just have inflow to grapple with on there. I alluded to this a little bit earlier with some of our service area extending outside the city and into Fairfax County and some of the challenges that presents. Cedar Lane is the biggest one. About 2/3 of the sewer users are actually Fairfax County residents. So there's very little we can address within the city limits. And this is going to have to be a partnering with Fairfax County on how to address specifically the inflow within the Cedar Lane subshed. Fairfax County staff have been open to that, and those discussions and kind of ideas are ongoing. Next slide.
Hey, can I interrupt just for a second? So one thing to note, that that Cedar Lane subshed that Zach is talking about.
Excuse me.
Bless you. That is an area that the county has raised as a concern because it has a very high level of peak flow right now. But it's only about 5% of the total of the city system. So it's a small part of the system that contributes a fairly outsized, disproportionate part of the problem. And the majority of those residents happen to be Fairfax County residents. That's just we're noting that as a sort of a complicated subset of the problem we're trying to solve.
And for reference, the Cedar Lane subshed is primarily along Hillwood and then down the side streets into the county. There's a little bit from Broad, but just very, very little bit. So that gives you an idea of the size of the city we're talking about, just for some reference as well. And then the last subshed we have in the Fairfax County sewer shed is the Sizzler subshed. This is the one we've been focused on. This has most of our flows and is also contributing to our greatest peak factor issues. This is the subshed that we are looking at a flow equalization basin. This would be sited likely within Cavalier Park somewhere. This is a underground basin, and think of it as a big vault to where when we hit those really large peak flows, we're able to capture and hold some of this sewage, so that we can slowly release it. So I use the July 2019 storm as an example. We had about 4 or 5 inches of rain in less than an hour. That I think that equated to somewhere around a 200-year storm. But the idea behind it would be we would capture that peak I&I, right? We're capturing all that extra water. And then after that initial hour of rain has stopped, we're going to slowly release it over the next several hours, so that instead of one big surge, we have one long kind of mini surge, so that we're not overwhelming a sewer pipe downstream, having sewage come out of a manhole into somebody's basement, anything like that. So it's a way to capture it, keep it in a vault that's designed to hold sewage rather than having backups into household streets, streams, whatever they may be. We are, as of right now, looking at putting this basin underneath the tennis courts. We're looking to see if the parking lot or the basketball court would be viable as well. But based on the size and kind of where all the infrastructure is located, the tennis courts are the primary location right now. And then, as I said, this does provide kind of that I&I management, so that we're able to meet the peak flow restrictions. The other benefit of this, it would actually be able to control up to 1.75 million gallons a day from the daily flow conveyance, without getting too into the weeds and too technical. Even though they are two separate flows, they are connected. So by sizing the basin for 1.75, we would be able to purchase another 250,000 gallons a day, 2028, 2030, whenever we would need it. So that kind of goes back to that second or third slide where we were talking about future growth and potential.
Hey, Zach.
Next slide.
Hey, Zach.
Yes.
While we're on this flow equalization structure that Justine asked about, to make sure I'm understanding, this may be an ignorant question. So we were talking about the sewage capacity, but this flow equalization basin is stormwater. Is that correct?
So I apologize for that. The flow equalization is for sewer capacity, but our sewer capacity issues are peak flow issues, which occur during rain events.
So we're trying to prevent lots of rainwater from going into the sewer system.
We're trying to manage. We're trying to manage the rainwater that does enter the sewer system.
And is it silly to ask why not prevent the rainwater from getting into the sewer system in the first place? Or is that too difficult to solve?
It's a matter of feasibility. The size, so the Sizzler subshed is around 80% of our total flows. Trying to manage the I&I, even on a best case scenario, doesn't completely solve our issues. So there is still a need for a flow equalization basin. And it's something that frankly is unachievable in the next decade.
So we should just accept that rainwater is going to flow into the sewage system, and this just helps manage the flow of the stormwater. So
correct. Yes. Yes. The general rule of thumb, a sewer system that is in really good shape will see around a 10% rate of I&I. And then I can't remember what we're at. You'll have to forgive me on that. But what I do know is that even if we hit a 10% rate, we're still nowhere close to what the flow equalization structure provides.
got it. Sorry. Yeah, Debbie had one more on this topic.
Mm-hmm.
Along the, this may be a dumb question line, but when we talk about, you mentioned a 200-year storm was in 2019. We've talked about the $9.3 million and the $10 million. What is that architecture aiming towards managing? Is that when you turn it into a 200-year storm or a 100-year storm, or how do we decide how much to spend given the fact that we know we are having increasing storms? Like you say a 100-year storm, then we have, not you, but they, say there's a 100-year storm, we have one 10 years later. These are happening more frequently. We know that those tables that the ESC folks reference have been updated, but that's not our storm. Like, what's the goal of that 9.3 and $10 million? How do we make
Yes,
a decision on how to spend our funds and prepare for the future while we're at this stage?
Yes, great couple of questions. The easy one is the 9.3 buys us the daily capacity. We have to make that purchase to grow as a city. Right, that's just daily usage from our residents, our commercial businesses, visitors, patrons, so on and so forth. The 10 million for the flow equalization basin, that basin is sized for the July 2019 storm. You have to forgive me. I also don't remember the peak factors on that. But that was like a 200 plus year storm event. Should be exceedingly rare. We've not had one of those since, I want to say it was like the 1880s or something like that. And we did pop off a couple of manholes throughout the city during that storm, which indicates to us that those sewer mains are running full, and that it would, I won't say it would be impossible, but it would be very, very difficult to exceed that flow rate that we saw during that July 2019 storm.
Thank you.
Aaron has one more on this.
Yeah, so Zach, and maybe you're going to get to this. My question on this $9.3 million one-time expense, as far as I understood the presentation, the sale of that is contingent on our building this $10 million tank structure. Like, we're not going to get the sale without our managing our peak flow issue by doing this? Like, or are these two separate things in terms of we can buy the capacity, but the expectation is that we're going to be doing something on our end, or are they linked together for purposes of even increasing our current capacity? In terms of when we need to budget the $20 million.
Yes, so they are linked. I will say Fairfax County is happy to sell us the additional 500,000 gallons with the expectation that we are going to address our peak flows. There's nothing, I don't know if I want to phrase it that way. The only thing binding us to that is the IJA agreement for using whether they're their sewers, their plant, whatever it may be. And that does have repercussions if we fail to meet the peak flow factors. We're working through some of those with them, but they are linked in that sense. So that we can't just simply buy the 500,000 and be like, yeah, we're not going to do this and then forget about it.
And then, sorry, and then this piece of the equalization system and the purchase is still separate from any of the pump station that would need to separately be installed if we were trying to move capacity over to 4 Mile Run. So like on your miscellaneous growth, like that's kind of truly miscellaneous growth and not like the new special exception application that may be coming in Quinn. Like that sort of assumes that something is pumping or some gravity is bringing that sewer capacity over into 4 Mile Run. So there's like a third element to this that's also in the mix for potentially some sort of funding.
Yes, I will. I think that actually starts on the next slide.
You have that in your appendix, Zach. I think there's an assumption that projects on the east side of town would go towards Arlington.
Right.
Which has more than enough capacity according to the numbers here.
Right, but there's to moving to managing the water that's on this side of the town, to the inflow, right? And purchasing the capacity that we need, and then moving some of this I&I issue into 4 Mile Run by repiping pieces that are currently in the Trips Run shed.
Yeah, maybe, Zach, before we get into the pumping to Arlington County, just to pause just one moment about the linkage between the peak flow vault that would cost about $10 million and the Fairfax County purchase. Here's the way the county is thinking about that linkage. So with the sale of additional capacity, they would increase our peak flow conveyance factor. But they would also then say, if you exceed that, there will be consequences. And those consequences are what we're negotiating right now. We think it would be appropriate to tie the consequences to future purchases of capacity, which we think we will need. But if we have exceedances of our peak flow, the county could say, we're not going to sell you additional capacity until you have a record of not exceeding the peak flow factor. That's the way we're thinking would be a reasonable way for us to stay aligned on trying to meet this public policy need. The county has also proposed fines or other financial penalties, which we are pushing back, frankly. But so the linkage is really about the consequences of what happens if we exceed the peak flows. So what Zach has presented and what Alan has done preliminary and kind of very preliminary engineering on is how could we guarantee that we would not exceed those caps? And the vault is one way that we would say we're feeling very confident we're not going to exceed those caps, so therefore we will not have those consequences. That's where we have more work to do to sort of get that all ironed out with the county and get our city attorney and their attorneys all happy with it, and ultimately the city council feeling like this is a fair agreement.
And can I just ask one more question, Zach, about just visualizing what a storm inflow peak equalization tank looks like? Like, right? It's different than a stormwater like retention tank. Is this like a giant circular, like 20-foot diameter, like tank that's in the ground and then has piping from other places connecting to it? Or is this bigger than that? Is this?
So we're still working on the final size. This is, other than having sewage in it and wanting to be confined, whether it's for odor control or whatever it may be, this is almost exactly like a stormwater detention basin, right? It's and I'm going to make these numbers up just to preface. These are not necessarily anything based in reality, but this is a 12-inch pipe in with an 8-inch pipe out, and then this really big vault, right? So an 8-inch pipe clearly flows less than a 12-inch pipe. So whenever that 12-inch pipe is running full, this basin can fill up. And then when that 12-inch pipe stops running full and the 8-inch pipe is running full, it will slowly draw down to zero. And then you will have a steady state flow until the next, whether it be rain event, surcharge, whatever it may be. So it's almost exactly like a stormwater detention basin. Detention basin.
But to have a picture of how big, Alan, do you want to sort of paint the picture of how big is this vault?
So we have hired a consultant to do a feasibility study on this, and they are a long-term sanitary engineering company with a lot of experience, Greeley and Hansen. And their initial sizing of it to be about 750,000 gallons is the size of the tennis courts at Cavalier Trail Park and 8 feet deep. So it is the difference between a stormwater facility is they are open to the air, whereas sewage will not be. It will be buried in the ground instead.
And the tennis courts go back on top.
Okay.
So we did something similar at the city hall. Should be. But we did something similar for stormwater at City Hall, about 10 years ago.
And what does Jesse Thackeray have under it?
And that's stormwater also. So there's no sanitary in those vaults.
Is that the tennis courts also?
But it is, yeah. So we've used tennis courts for this purpose, and this would be our third
Pickleball,
version of it.
sewer? Okay.
As long as you find replacement pickleball courts while doing that.
Zach, do you want to continue? Sorry, we keep peppering you with questions.
No worries. All good. So we also have kind of some post 2025 capacity solutions. I'm going to switch up A and B on number one real quick. So as I said before, this flow equalization basin is oversized for the immediate need of 500,000 gallons. It allows us for a total of 1.75 million gallons. So we will have the opportunity to purchase an additional 250,000 gallons per day if it's needed at some point in the future without having to in theory, do any more than purchase the capacity from the county. The other option we are looking at, and we can do a deeper dive at a later date with council, is the Quinns project. Is currently looking at constructing a public force main to divert their sewage flows over to Arlington. I do want to, and I don't know who mentioned it, I do want to make a note that this doesn't necessarily solve an I&I issue. What this does is solve the daily conveyance flow issue. So the as of right now, the concept behind this force main is that up to, and this is an idealized situation, so I want to emphasize up to 6 potential future projects could join onto this force main. Each one of those 6 projects would have their own pumps within their building that would then pump to the public force main. So private pumps, public main, and then that would allow us to divert the daily conveyance of sewer loading from those developments to Arlington County. We have quite a bit of extra allowable daily conveyance flow at Arlington, whereas with Fairfax County, we are kind of running into walls, right? In 2025, we're already back talking to another purchase capacity of 250,000 gallons. So that's the general idea behind that. The Quinns force main, doesn't necessarily help us solve that peak flow. Right, it's a new development. It would be contributing very, very little to any I&I issue, even if it was a gravity main. It would have new laterals. Part of the building code now versus 50 or 60 years ago is you're not allowed to connect downspouts, sump pumps, anything like that. So new developments are actually fixing some of our I&I issues just by simply new building codes. But I do want to emphasize diverting Quinns in that surrounding area does not fix an I&I peak issue, only the daily conveyance and how we can kind of shuffle that around.
Hey, Zach.
Yes.
On this option with the force main that would come with the Quinns project, you said 6 new projects could be accommodated if we put that in. Is there a geographical area where those projects would have to be, like, should it be on the eastern, southern end of the city, or could it be projects on the west side as well?
So they are, I came up with good language for this for the VC. How did I phrase that? They are properties with right-of-way frontage along South Maple from Broad to Wallace. So it would be the bowling alley parking lot, the One City Center, Quinns. If the bowling alley ever redeveloped, if Virginia Village ever moves forward, there are those kind of lots through there.
So it would be the southeastern side of the city. Like, you couldn't have something like in Gordon Road
Correct.
pumping all the way to Arlington.
Correct.
Got it.
Yes. All right. And then one of the longer term capacity solutions, so as Mr. Shields had mentioned earlier, our biggest issue is the peak flow through the sewer main. One of the projects that Fairfax County has initiated is a study of their own sewer mains, right? We are not alone in our issues. Fairfax County is experiencing very similar issues. Conveniently enough for I think both parties involved, one of Fairfax County issues overlaps with the same constriction we have for our peak flows. So they're doing a study to see how big that sewer main needs to be. We can get on the ground floor by working and partnering with them now to kind of, for lack of a better word, I'll say name a capacity allowance that we need for the future so that that is accommodated for the next several decades. We're very, very early on with that, but we have had a couple of meetings starting to lay that groundwork and looking at projections, I think out to 2050. So that's a much longer term. That's not going to be something that is done in the next 5 years. But that is a very long-term solution to some of our problems. Next slide, please. And then I alluded to this a few minutes ago. These are the Arlington County sewer flows. So as I said earlier, we're allotted 0.8 million gallons per day. We're using about 0.3. The Broad Washington development does flow to the sewer shed. If we redirect the Quinns to the sewer shed, the allowable capacity we would have remaining is 0.32 MGD. So rather than trying to fight the Fairfax County restrictions, constantly going back to purchase capacity, the idea behind that force main, again, is to get flows to Arlington County so that we can use those availability fees on capacity and improvements within the Fairfax County sewer shed. And I think it's the final slide after this one. Yes. So with that, I'll open it up to any further questions. Or actually, before I open it up to questions, I'll hand it over to Mr. Shields and see if he would like to add anything.
No, I think that's it. We'll look forward to any questions. I know the council wanted this briefing before considering the Quinns project. We are casting the voluntary concessions as an option. The default option would be that they will build those facilities in the force main to pump it to Arlington County. But prior to site plan, the city could say, no, don't do that. Just have it go to Fairfax County. The structure of that pump and force main is that in lieu of paying the availability fees that they normally would be liable for, they would use those availability fees and construct that for the city up to the amount of the availability fees that are owed. If the cost exceeds that, these VCs have not been finalized, but the concept is that they would be liable for any costs and exceedance of what they would normally pay for the availability fees. Availability fees, just so you're aware, the council updated and revised its these are the one-time fees that developers pay. So currently, just so you understand the scale of it, it's $7,088 per apartment is the fee that a developer pays in terms of these one-time availability fees. There's a whole slew of other fees as well, but that just sort of gives you a sense of what the dollar amounts are.
Great, thank you. So before we get to questions, I think for each of these items, we had actually invited our boards and commissions to join us. And I think we might have a member of the Public Utilities Commission in the audience. If you would like to join us, we'd welcome you at the table. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Okay,
And listening.
so we have questions now for Zach, Allen, and Wyatt. Justine?
Just a few questions here. So you highlighted 3 sheds that go to Fairfax County. Are there more sheds, or are those just the 3 problem sheds?
So those are 3 subsheds. Those are the only 3 subsheds within the total Fairfax County sewer shed.
Gotcha. And for the flow equalization facility, does that only serve one of the sheds, or is that, I don't know, can water and overflow from the other sheds go to that system?
So it only serves the Sizzlers subshed. The only other subshed it could serve would be, or I say could, it's a little bit of effort, but the only other sewer shed subshed that's near it would be the Tinner Hill subshed, and we generally don't have issues in that one.
So those other 2 sheds, so the Tinner Hill and the Cavalier Cedar
Lane
one, those, it seems like it's unlikely that we would need a flow equalization, I don't know, in the future, that we would need to construct something for those sheds, because it doesn't seem like they're overflowing.
So Tinner Hill generally doesn't have any peak flow issues. Not to say on some very, very extreme storms we couldn't have them, but based on the data we have, they are minimal to non-existent. The Cedar Lane subshed does have peak flow issues. We're hoping that we can put a dent in that by finishing relining of the sewer mains and the manholes. There are some ongoing discussions with Fairfax County on how to partner for the sewer users that are Fairfax County residents to try and do some kind of I&I disconnection program or somehow target removing downspouts and sump pumps from being connected to the sewer main. Yeah.
Do you foresee needing a flow equalization for that Cedar Lane shed?
Alan, I'm going to defer to you on this one. You've had a few more discussions than I have had with Fairfax. I'm sorry to throw you under the bus on this.
That's fine. So in our last meeting on Friday with Fairfax County, we talked a lot about that. And the problem is that any equalization basin to be effective needs to be at the very bottom, most downhill part of the shed. And all of that is in Fairfax County. So where could we put it? We've sort of rejected, so what we would end up doing is maybe big parallel pipes instead of a tank. But the best place for it is in the right-of-way, which is VDOT, which is always a problem working with VDOT. But Fairfax County felt like we should verify that instead. So at this point in Cedar Lane, as Zach said originally, we're going to line all the sewers, we're going to line all the manholes, we're going to fix some aerial laterals that are in Fairfax County as part of Hillwood 1 storm drainage project. And there's another 6 that maybe we can look at, but after that, that's all we can do. And Fairfax has seemed to accept that, I thought, in the most recent meeting.
Great. And my final question is, just to confirm, I heard that the Sizzler shed was 80% of total flows. So of all these 3 sheds, 80% of the flow is from the Sizzler shed. Is that correct? Okay, perfect. Do you have like
And
general...
most of the economic development is in the Sisler shed as well. So that's where the growth is.
Gotcha. Do you have the numbers for like what the other 2 sheds account for? Is it both like...
Cedar Lane is around 5%, and then the Tinner Hill subshed is the remaining 15, rounded but rough.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Dave?
So thank you, I think. Do you have a map of the different subsheds? Was that part of the handout?
If we go, Sophie, if we could go back to the map, we can probably just with a cursor show.
Could you provide, for future reference, a GPS aerial view, not just of the printed map, but also an aerial view, and show me the boundaries of the different subsheds?
One that we can just point out pretty easily is the Cedar Lane subshed, which we've talked about. That's 5% of our flows. But that's the one kind of in the lower right hand, and it goes all the way from Hillwood down to Route 50. So all of those streets, are in Fairfax County. That's that sewer shed. So that's
Where is that? You're hovering. It seems like it's
move
Lower
the
yellow part.
a little further to the right there, Sophie. There you add further. There you go.
Like Hillwood South.
That area. There you go.
Right. So how far back do you have flow data?
I believe the county keeps it for 10 years. What they have shared with us to date has been to 2014.
Okay, what I would like to see is a comparison by subshed of the flow in 2014 versus the current flow that's the basis for the current discussion. Because I'd like to see the contribution of growth during that period to the current issue. It's not only a matter of history, but a matter of future planning.
Yeah, so when we come back, I think Mr. Shields had mentioned March earlier, but next time we come back, we'll toss on some lines that delineate the different subsheds, and then we'll provide the 2014 versus the 2023 flows, so that council has an idea of how much each subshed has increased over that 9 to 10 year period.
Right. Okay, that's the data that I'll ask for right now. Thank you.
Caroline?
Yeah, so the reason why we brought this up was because of the Quinn project. And Zach, I'm not clearly hearing what the staff recommendation is on this topic relative to the Quinn project. So I kind of need you to spell it out for me. Is it council, based on the analysis, the recommendation is, we believe we not only need to add voluntary concessions, but we have an opportunity to do X. Like, there's a lot of technical analysis and I can feel the intellectualness of it, but I'm trying to get at the pragmaticness of, I just created a word, of what that means for the Quinn project. Does that, can you help me break it down into speak human words around what's the recommendation for the Quinn project regards to this? Because it seems like we have a really bad problem that we're going to have to deal with really, like today, if and it's the numbers are scary.
Yeah, so staff's recommendation as of right now is to have Quinn's pump and discharge to Arlington. We have engaged with Arlington to make sure that they are agreeable with modifying the service boundary areas. Initial indications are they're okay with it, but we do have a meeting, I think it's next week, to have a further discussion. So that goes to what Mr. Shields said about the voluntary concession is we do want them to pump to Arlington. If we find something unexpected or contrary to initial indications with Arlington, we do reserve the right to have a gravity feed to Fairfax.
Okay, so the Quinn project is coming next Monday. So is legal counsel okay with the wording on voluntary concessions? Like, is there any conflict from the receiving party, the developer, with what it is the city is putting forth as a need and requirement? Which, the fact that it's voluntary makes me a little...
So the good
edgy.
news is, I think Zach had raised this as an issue with Quinn many months ago. And so there's been exchanges of VCs on this topic for months. The city attorney has reviewed it. Of course, the city attorney had some comments on that language, so we're refining the language.
Okay.
But it's...
Seems positive,
it seems positive, and it's not like a new inject at the last second. On the to the contrary, this is something that the developer's been aware of for many months, and so we've had time to work it through in a fairly calm way.
Okay, so it's looking like, from what we're hearing, that staff has put forth a recommendation to manage this issue. The Quinn project is open to supporting and including it. Sally's reviewed the legal language, and we have taken appropriately taken the right steps and opportunities to help manage this risk as part of the, okay. So that's the update on that one, okay.
Can I ask an ancillary question because
Yes.
it ties into what you were just talking about?
Yes.
So when you're looking at the pending major developments, is Quinn putting in that pump, will that determine where the Broad Washington goes? Because is that including...
Broad Washington is already going to Arlington County, so
That's why I was confused because it says pending. We know that's going to go.
Yeah,
Pending,
that's
pending would
already
be the
said.
actual
That-
volume.
That is a done
That's why
deal.
you have that word in there.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me add on to that question.
Can I add on?
That was a good question. Okay, sure.
Okay, sorry, one other question. So then, in terms of this, so the 7,000 or so per unit times the 217 units gets you to something like $1.54 million. Is that at least in the general area of what this sort of thing costs?
So the availability fees from the apartments, I agree with that number. 1.5 million sounds right. There's also some additional availability fees that we'll be collecting from the retail commercial tenants as well. And if I know Alan is in the room, if he feels I'm off base, he can jump in. I think we're expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.8 to $2 million total in availability fees from the Quinn's development. Their estimate for the sewer force main currently resides in, I think, the $2 to $2.3 million neighborhood. So they are relatively close to each other in terms of cost. As Mr. Shields said earlier, we would not be going above and beyond the availability fees. Whatever they would owe in availability fees would be the maximum that, yeah.
So I think when it comes to financials, now that we've actually confirmed that we've put ourselves in a position where, Dave, we negotiated with a developer and we got something good. Now come the financials. Now the question is, well, can we flow out, not in PowerPoint, but perhaps a spreadsheet that shows the impact of the contribution that the Quinn's project's going to have net to the problem, which is we need to,
Yes.
our capacity needs, and to show a linear progression of across time for how different solutions mitigate the problem, right? Because right now we have a solution where we're repiping the Cedar Lane shed. Okay, so how does that contribute to the problem positively, right? So I just want to kind of see how the in-flight solutions impact the total number, right, that we need to purchase. And I want to back into that total number we need to purchase just so that we proof that that's number we need to purchase with all the things that we've got in flight so that we see that buildup of the story for how, for when, and when we also need to outlay that kind of capital, right? Because you've got things in flight in 25. I see a dollar figure, but I'm not sure when we need to purchase it to mitigate the problem. See what I'm saying, Zach?
Yeah, so go ahead. So a lot of your questions will be at that next briefing, where we get more into how we're going to fund that total $19.3 million. I will say the $9.3 million would be kind of an immediate purchase. We want to get that taken care of right away. The flow equalization would be in the next couple of years. And I think the core of what you're getting at is kind of the question of how does Quinn's help us financially? And it's not so much how does Quinn's interact with the other subsheds or the other sewer sheds, so much as by Quinn's constructing the force main, we don't have to buy capacity for them, One City Center, all these other developments, which means those availability fees become available for use to purchase capacity, fund flow equalization, so on and so forth.
It's a cost avoidance thing. The
Correct.
The cost avoidance.
Eastern side of town.
Exactly. And that will show the next time we come back to council, where we've got that how we're going to fund 19.3 million a little more refined.
Are there other questions? Okay.
Are these purchases for daily flow? Is it just like usually a one-time purchase? Like in the 1990s, we bought 1 million gallons per day, and then we don't have to pay money anymore. So it's just everything is one time. There's no ongoing costs.
That is correct. We do contribute on the CIP side of things. We do contribute to a certain amount of plant upgrades based on capacity. And then we've obviously got any kind of usage fees from sewer usage. But we do not have to continue to repurchase this capacity.
And where did the sewage usage fees go? Did that go to us, or we pass that on to Fairfax or other places?
Those go to us, and those fund our sewer account. So we've got a sewer crew, we've got some equipment, we flush mains, we repair, we spot repair mains in-house, we contract out sewer lining, manhole lining, kind of things like that.
Zach, that 0.5 for purchase is really the number, even if you factor in all the relining on the Cedar Lane branch?
No. The purchase is simply the check we write to Fairfax County. All the other improvements we've made to our system, that's in addition to.
And that's in the current CIP.
That's right.
Okay. I have a couple questions if rest you're not. So taking a step back to make sure I understand this. So if I try to separate the $2 amount, Zach, the 9 million for the 0.5 million in gallons in capacity, that is for new growth, population growth projects. The $10 million is essentially solving a legacy issue with I&I.
That's correct.
That we've inherited over time because people have storm drains or sump pumps going into our sewer.
Correct.
Okay, so we are not blaming this on new development. I want to make sure we kind of clarify and separate the two. Clearly, we have a capacity issue because we are growing as a city and we need to address that. I think when we get to the discussion on financing, it would be helpful to understand history of the availability fees for a project so far and where they've gone. Because I think in concept, development should pay for development. And so if we believe that to be kind of our policy, ideally, the availability fees for the upcoming projects can help go towards financing some of this work. Is that the thinking from staff?
So we believe in that as a policy, but I do want council to be aware that the financing of this is difficult. And so when we talk with you in March about the numbers, the availability fees that we have on hand do not cover this. And so we're going to, we're going to refine numbers and kind of sharpen our pencils. Not the Fairfax County purchase number, but the peak flow mitigation vault. Those numbers we'll continue to refine. We have seen, however, that cost estimates tend not to go down. All the refinement that we want to do, that's the bad news. So I don't want council to leave this discussion saying, this is going to be sort of a smooth thing to figure out. This is going to be quite a challenge. This is a small sewer collection system, and picking up a $19 million charge is going to be a real financial challenge for us.
Yeah. And then the third thing, which I think Caroline clarified, is that for the Quinn project, given the staff recommendation is to go ahead with the pump station or the force main, that takes care of the decision that we have in front of us as scheduled next week. That is separate from the Fairfax County's
Well,
purchase.
what
Is that
I
correct?
like about the way that is set up is that it remains an option. And so we can make, I believe, the best business case. What is the best business case for the ratepayers of the city? To either pump it to Arlington or have it flow by gravity to Fairfax County. What Zach has indicated is we think it's pretty obvious that the better option is going to be to go to Arlington. So that's why we've made that the default that the developer will do. But we want to keep our options open as more facts, this is still an evolving situation, and so we want to keep that as an option.
Got it. My last question, final one, should be about this miscellaneous growth kind of contingency bucket that you have, Zach. What are the assumptions behind it? Is that based on a certain number of housing units, the by right residential development that we see around town? Is it, what does that encapsulate? Certain assumption of rate of growth?
Yeah, it's primarily an average based on kind of by right, primarily commercial businesses, and the growth we've seen over the last few years on average. It also accounts for some of the recent T-zone changes, and kind of a best guess at how many of those we might see over the next 2 to 3 years.
Got it. And they're that total contingency bucket looks like it's a third of what Founders 2 would be.
Yes, it's not like even Quinn's is only I think it's 0.07 million gallons a day, so it would account for something the equivalent of half of Quinn's. It is, in all honesty, it's primarily background residential growth more so than a commercial building being torn down and rebuilt. For example, the Stratford Motor Lodge. With what they're proposing is actually less than what they were approved for as the motor lodge. So just to give council kind of an idea.
Yeah, where I'm going with this is for single family redevelopment, which is largely by right, and we don't review probably sewer capacity, right? Do we have to worry about that happening in the backdrop?
No, not typically. Even though some of the tear down rebuilds are larger houses, the average family size seems to be staying pretty consistent, right? We're not seeing anything that indicates a significant shift to multi-generational housing or anything like that. So the single family tear down rebuilds staying pretty consistent, and we don't get a whole lot of lot subdivisions that where one house becomes 2 or 3 or 4. So we're pretty consistent on our single-family housing stock
Got
and
it.
usage.
Yep. And you mentioned that also like potential T-zone, like townhomes or condos that we've talked about would also be accounted for.
Yes, that's correct.
Other questions before we wrap this up? Mary Beth? Oh, Dave.
Yeah, so the reason why I asked for the data from 2014 to the current day is to really put a price tag on the development that we've had since then. And I don't think the I&I is necessarily the sole contributor to the 10 million. So I'm interested in knowing in each sub area, the contribution of the mixed-use developments to the flow.
We can certainly do that.
And that is
I
the
mean,
only way we can put a legitimate price tag on what these developments have contributed that now we're paying for. And then what does that tell us about planning for the future? Should we be more aggressive about what we're requiring in future developments so that we don't repeat that?
Just one way to think of it, though, when you have a new house or a new major building, all that is new infrastructure. Those are very sealed systems. And under new permitting, since the 70s, you can't hook up sump pumps, downspouts, any of these things. So the stormwater peak flows truly is a legacy issue. These are from houses built in the 50s and 60s, or it could be homeowners or property owners illicitly hooking their sump pumps up to the sanitary sewer system without a permit. There could be some of that going on, but this truly is a legacy issue. It's the I&I is not being driven by the new hookups. It's an old issue, and the county is wrestling with this old issue, and they're asking for the city's allyship, essentially, with some consequences, with some sticks, as part of their comprehensive effort to solve it. Because it's bad when you have these big rain events and it backflows in someone's basement. That's a bad day for that homeowner. Or if it pops a manhole and discharges into a stream, that's a violation of state DEQ laws, and it's a big environmental issue. And so, as a matter of public policy, we get it. We are aligned with the county. We want this to not occur. But going home by home to address it, we believe is just very difficult. And particularly the sump pumps, it's just very hard to detect those.
So,
Yeah, and I'll add on to what Mr. Shields said. The data we have, and I don't know if it's as refined as what you're looking for, Councilmember Snyder, but the data we have does clearly indicate that the peak flows are driven during rain events, and from the best we can gather from it, it does appear to be that older housing stock. I don't want to speak to numbers today. I don't want to over-exaggerate, misspeak, or anything. But we can bring some of those to you. And then I know for Cedar Lane, we can kind of drill down into that one specifically just to provide some examples of kind of why we're saying what we're saying tonight, to kind of demonstrate that the older housing stock is contributing most of this.
right, but the newer housing stock is contributing to significantly more flow.
Yeah, that is
that right?
that is the reason why we are engaged with Fairfax County to purchase more treatment capacity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is figure out who should pay for that.
But we want growth to pay for growth. That is, philosophically, we agree with that. The difficulty that we're going to see, though, is our balance of availability fees is not going to cover the full 20 million by a long shot. So that's the challenge we have.
Mary Beth, do you have something?
And this kind of relates to the same thing. On the Quinn's project, this is in the voluntary concessions, correct? And with each set of voluntary concessions, there's always a basket of benefits to the city. So this being in there means that something else isn't in there. Is that correct?
Well,
Or is it
we've
different?
passed this really as in lieu of paying that big availability fee.
So it
thing,
balances
instead
out.
they're going to do this pump over.
Okay, so we
So
will bounce.
this is
right,
actually
that's what you said earlier. Okay.
essentially kind of neutral from the developer's perspective.
Okay.
Although we have put the risk on the developer if the costs exceed it, we want
Right.
those exceedances to stay with the developer. That's an improvement.
But it's not taking away from any other benefit that we might be receiving from this development.
No.
Okay. Thanks.
But if we benchmark this problem, Chicago, bunch of older homes, right? I mean, we cannot be the only city that's dealing with this. Have we benchmarked how other cities have dealt with this? I was reading something about Chicago where they implemented valves, right? Like, I mean, I have no idea, I'm not the expert. I just want to make sure for the amount of money that we're talking about, you know, it might make sense to benchmark.
So we have some communities here just in the Northern Virginia area that have already started to tackle some of these issues. So Alexandria, for example, is actually tunneling under the Potomac to create a flow equalization structure to handle their surcharge loads. Arlington has a couple of flow equalization basins, and a couple communities have started to stand up some I&I disconnection programs. Where it can actually be a benefit to a homeowner to disconnect sump pumps and downspouts. So to your point, nothing we're doing is particularly unique, and we are kind of benchmarking ourselves definitely to our peer jurisdictions in Northern Virginia, if not kind of scattered throughout the United States.
We rolled out tunneling something.
Okay,
Under the Potomac.
we asked all the questions. Okay, one last one, Zach, sorry. So given that 10 out of the 19 million, again, is this legacy issue, have we stopped new I&I from happening?
Yes. So under the new, and so the easiest way to describe this, right, between building code and our own stormwater codes, which I was not here in the state 10 to 15 years ago, but talking to those who were, right, all of those downspouts that are coming off of the roof now have to go to a stormwater management facility, stormwater BMP, whatever you may want to call it, so that we are right. We're ensuring that they are no longer connected to the sanitary sewer main. They have to run through the stormwater BMP, and those sites have to manage stormwater on site. In addition to just the stormwater, the building code also requires various different testing on the downspouts to ensure where they flow to. And then part of what we do in DPW as a final sign off for single family homes and commercial developments, if there are sump pumps, we want to visually see the discharge, and we want to see it either tying into a storm pipe, preferably running across a yard, tying into that stormwater BMP, but somehow visually see it that it's not going into that sanitary sewer. So those are some building code items as well.
So that's good, we're not making it worse. Okay.
If I could also just note, the city of Falls Church has been a very responsible sewer agency. The city council has funded year in and year out for decades now a sewer main relining program where we take care of our older mains. We televise them regularly. Where we find deficiencies, we fix them. So I do want to make sure that that point is on the record as well. And so our problems are pretty typical of older systems where you have, these issues generally that are at the private, beyond the private lateral at the home, coming from the homes.
And all that relining is paid for by the tap fees we talked about?
No, the relining is generally, we view that as an operation and maintenance expense, so our regular rate payers pay for that.
Okay.
I will note, if I could jump in on what Mr. Shields just said, I will note we do pipe burst occasionally. The most recent section of sewer main we did pipe bursting on was to support the West End development that was paid for through availability fees. But as Mr. Shields said, if it's just kind of maintaining the existing sewer size, that is paid through that operations end of things, just to clarify.
Okay. Well, until March then, I think. Thank you for the very thorough briefing on this. Thank you, Zach and Alan, for joining us, and for the PUC for being here too. Ready to move on to our second one, which is a little behind on schedule. Bike master plan preview.
So we're very excited to give the council this briefing. We were originally planning to do this in December. And Carrie O'Danino is joining us virtually. And what we really want, Carrie's going to just give us an overview of where we are in the bike master planning process. But we do want to circle back with the council on that decision, on that discussion we wanted to have back in December of the corridors that we're identifying for deeper study for bike facilities. And just for the council sort of thinking about that, knowing that there are typically trade-offs associated with either right-of-way acquisition or impacting on-street parking or other uses, or possibly going with sort of super share ideas and trying to calm the traffic so bikes and parking and cars can all kind of live peacefully together on the street. Those are sort of the range of options. So we want the council just to be very thoughtful about our engagement on these corridors, sort of knowing typically the very high level of public interest in people's residential streets, the streets they live on.
Great.
So,
Carrie,
let me turn.
before I turn over to you, I think we have a member of the CACT. Art, would you like to join us at the table? Sure. Thank you. And Carrie, sorry we bumped you from that marathon meeting we had back in December, so thanks for coming back on an earlier night.
That's all right. It was very late that night, so.
Awesome. Take it away.
Yeah, so thank you. And again, I'm Carrie O'Danino. Good evening, Mayor Hardy and members of City Council. So tonight, Council is requested to receive an update and provide feedback regarding the Bicycle Master Plan update. And as Mr. Shields mentioned, tonight's work session is focused on the existing conditions analysis and those priority routes or spot improvements. And staff is seeking concurrence to proceed with development of multiple conceptual designs for each of the priority routes and improvements. So line 6, based on community input and professional guidance, staff recommends proceeding with conceptual design for the east-west connection between WNOD Trail and West Falls Church, East Broad Street, Northwest Street between West Broad Street and Fairfax County, Southwest Street between Fairfax County and West Broad Street, Great Falls Street, and Park Avenue between North Virginia Avenue and West Street. So for background, the city's first bicycle master plan was adopted in 2015, and the Virginia Tech student study was conducted in 2022. Line 26, the council work plan includes an update to the city's bike master plan or the previous version of the work plan. Accordingly, the proposed scope of work includes the following: updates to the vision statement and goals, usage data, map of future routes, implementation section, and identifying priority improvements for implementation in the next 3 years, including cross sections and cost estimates. Moving down to line 40, the attached report from the consultant details existing and planned bike facilities, current bike usage, and analyzes the city's bike network using a level of stress analysis. The goal with the update is to work towards facilities for all ages and abilities and better connect isolated clusters of lower stress routes throughout the city. The map on page 3 shows some of those islands of lower stress routes throughout the city. And you can see how these clusters are separated by higher stress streets, such as Broad and Washington and other minor arterials and connectors. You can also see how the different color clusters are separated from one another. Line 57, as listed in the timing section of the report, staff has engaged the community through various boards and commissions and general community events. This included a CACT meeting, Environmental Sustainability Council meeting, community meeting, farmers market tabling at the middle and high schools, and an EDA meeting. The table in that report shows top routes identified by the public during those events. So staff took that input as well as the level of traffic stress analysis to develop those priority routes to be built in the next 3 years. Line 63, the east-west connection between the WND Trail and West Falls Church route is advancing to design under the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Transportation Land Use Connections program. Conceptual designs for East Broad Street, North and Southwest Street, Great Falls Street, and Park Avenue between North Virginia Avenue and West Street are recommended to advance to design as part of the Bicycle Master Plan update effort. Conceptual designs for a portion of Park Avenue are under design through the Park Avenue Great Streets project and Lincoln Avenue through the Greening of Lincoln project. In terms of fiscal impact, City Council previously appropriated $60,000 in local funds for consultant support for the Bike Master Plan update through the June 2023 budget amendment. Staff does anticipate a budget request for fiscal years 2025 through 26 based on priority routes developed through this plan update. Line 75, in terms of schedule, city staff has added additional public meetings as well as an online survey. Staff and the consultant are currently working on conceptual designs for selected routes. Staff is planning to come back to the public with those conceptual designs in March. So that next community meeting will be held in March along with the release of the online survey. And adoption of the updated plan is anticipated in May or June of this year. So looking back at the map on page 3, staff does want to emphasize the routes we'll be looking at during the public comment period. Again, these included East Broad Street, Northwest Street, Southwest Street, Great Falls Street, and Park Avenue. So implementing bike facilities on these routes could involve traffic calming, repurposing of existing parking lanes, or repurposing of existing travel lanes, looking at right-of-way. So I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Okay, we have 2 members of the CACT joining us. I'm going to start with you all to see if you have questions or comments.
I just want to say that Carrie has come to CACT, I actually think it was twice on this, and the discussions have been very good and very progressive. I think we support what's in here, and there's been lots of discussions. But the primary concern the CACT has is making sure that the plan has implementation, so that whatever we get down on paper, we actually see on the roads. The previous plan didn't quite make it to the roads in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think, sorry, hi, I'm Erin. For those of you who don't know, I'm the chair of CACT. So apologies, I'm a little late. I had some baby things to take care of. So yeah, just to echo, we love that we're moving into the direction of having a unified bike master plan. I think one of the things that we have discussed with Carrie and other members of city staff is ensuring that this is sort of a bigger picture and that it is enforceable, right? I think one of the challenges that we had with the previous bike master plan is there were a number of city projects that went through without compliance to the bike master plan, and we sort of call into question if that will be different this time and kind of what the plan is to ensure, right? We've seen this over and over again, lots of city projects, and sometimes it's because the utilities didn't comply, right? So what we're hoping is that if this is implemented, it will actually be enforceable, and we'll see that when streets are put back after, utilities or some other construction, that it will be in compliance. And I think that's kind of where CACT's concerns are. Obviously, the notion behind the document we're 100% for, and we're hoping that that's going to be a first step to, more complete streets vision. But I think that's sort of to sum up what we're looking at.
Great, thank you. Does staff have a response to that, or?
we agree on implementation being, a plan that we will implement, with every project that we go forward. That is the, with all of our capital planning, that sort of that planning process to grant obtainment or budgeting. And then
Okay, questions?
Yeah, I think to
Carolyn?
that end, it would be great to see what that implementation timeline is. So I love the fact that on line 36, it says review and revise implementation section. I'd love it if, Carrie, maybe you came back, or Wyatt, if we put this as an agenda item on a future work session topic, and then we address the comments here that we've heard from CACT. Would that be okay? Is that covered?
Yeah, absolutely.
Other questions or comments? Justine?
So just wanted to thank you for the community engagement on this and the, I guess, there was a farmer's market session and really just reaching out to the community. And I'll echo CACT's comments, which is it's great to finally see, or at least I'm hopeful that there will be progress on actually implementing bike lanes and bike facilities. In terms of the priority routes, it's hard to pick your top 5, but one that did seem like it was missing is Little Falls and that connection from Little Falls down to Park Avenue. I'm not sure if there's room to shift things around, maybe Northwest and Southwest Street or just West Street, and we put in Little Falls. But I do think that Little Falls is or should be a priority connection. The other thing that I'm wondering is about the scope of this bike master plan. I know that it's funny, we're calling it a bike master plan, but at least from what I was reading, it was more like here are 5 or 6 roads that we're prioritizing and making a plan to implement. And what I was at least expecting out of a bike master plan, at least in my head, is something that shows sort of a vision for 30 years where we want bike routes to go, including off-street trails, like a green loop. I know that that's been mentioned. A connection to Eden Center, perhaps through the cemetery or Falls Green. And so looking at places that we want easements or connections or other things like that that might not be on street. And so at least looking at the memo and all the other documents, it very much focuses on street connections. And so I guess what I'm wondering is there a plan to have a clear map of all the places that we want bike trails as part of this bike master plan? And if not, that would be something that we would want in some future planning, whether it's in the complete streets plan or something else.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We are planning to bring a markup of the plan document at those later meetings in April and May, and have a map, the map of future routes be marked up with that too.
And would that potentially include off-street connection? I mean, so I guess I'm going to reference the Green Loop again. Would it include, I guess, trails that or connections that don't exist yet, or potential easements and things like that we need to get?
We do have so the Parks for People chapter of the city's comprehensive plan does have some green loops and trails identified. And
so would that be part of the bike master plan, or would that be incorporated?
We can certainly reference existing other trails that are in that plan, and then also if there are additional trails that that folks want to add.
So just so that I'm clear, there will be some sort of comprehensive map at the end of this process.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And And then for traffic calming, you mentioned, I guess as you're going through the process of planning, there are, I think, bump outs were mentioned, speed bumps. I just wanted to flag that and making sure that they're bike-friendly bump outs and bike-friendly speed bumps. There are speed bumps where there's a little bit of a gap on the right or left side such that bikes can go through. There are also bump outs such that bikes can go through. And so just thinking of all the traffic calming measures in a bike-friendly way. Two more things. For the level of stress or the LTS study, does that impact anything that the city is going to do? I'm asking that specifically because as I was looking through the memo, some of these LTS ratings were far lower or claim that streets were far more safe and low stress to ride on than they actually are when you talk to residents or when you ride them on multiple days. And so I guess I would question some of those LTS ratings if it's something that the city's going to use or base any sort of decisions on.
Yeah, that was really more of an existing conditions analysis to sort of help set the stage for this process.
Okay, so it sounds like that's not going to, I guess the city's not going to base judgment as to what streets to do or other things based on those LTS ratings. Otherwise, I would ask to change some of those LTS ratings.
Yeah, that's a comment that's come through a number of times around the LTS ratings. I do think, those aren't, those don't necessarily sort of translate to what goes into the plan document.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, Erin?
So thank you. I'm gonna have a reaction maybe a little bit different from other folks in that I'm very supportive of all the bike infrastructure, but I would like there to be a lot more like concrete action. And I think maybe people, we've seen the amount of comments that have come through, and I think, I would imagine there are people who are very frustrated with the lack of progress from a 2015 master plan to what we're now doing in the 2023 master plan. And to me, for all the work that has sort of gone into this and like all the data that's in it, it's still, I had trouble still like synthesizing all of this. And it felt like very disjointed in terms of like, we did a lot of outreach and here's what this group said and here's what that group said. And what I want this to like turn into is we're hearing all of this and we're recommending, this plan of action to accomplish in the next 3 years with this funding because we think it's both feasible and fundable in terms of being able to accomplish this. And on top of what it is that we want to add to an existing bicycle sort of network, we are committing to maintain X, Y, and Z in terms of pre-existing bike facilities that for me, like, I wouldn't even know that they were pre-existing bike facilities unless you like told me that they were, right? Like, we live in the heart of downtown and take things that are designated as like bike lanes each day or on those roads. And like, I wouldn't know that they were a bike facility. And so I guess I'm asking for a little bit more help with this plan. Like, I understand and I'm in agreement with Justine's, like, we need a longer term vision of what we want a bicycle network to look like. But I really want like a 3-year action plan in terms of like maintenance, right? When we pave, here's our commitment to what it is that we're putting on the street in terms of infrastructure when we do that. What are we doing in terms of repainting the sharrows? What can we do in terms of green paint and how much is it gonna cost? Like when I'm down by the East Falls Church Metro Station, I see, the bike lanes and the green kind of paths, by the metro, and then, you know, we're in Falls Church territory or whatever, going towards Eden Center, and it's like, wait, where'd the green paint go? Like, the green paint seems like it would be an easy thing to do. Can we get that done in like the next 1 year, right? So like, I kind of want a low-hanging fruit framework, and here's what we can accomplish in 3 years framework, because we think it's important to do so. Maybe because it actually does like the bike loop from W&OD Trail, up Little Falls, down Park, connecting again, and then you like hit the business goal while also giving people a full street, you know, across downtown, so to speak. And so I guess, I don't know, I would like to see this in terms of like, where is our incredible like W&OD Trail resource? How are we making loops in and out of it? What are the feeders into it, so we get people on like a designated protected resource we already have? And then the school piece, I'm told, maybe is like a whole separate aspect of this, but like, where are we doing safe streets to school as like a piece of it? So I want to be positive because I want to be able to fund it and get it done, but I also, I don't know, I feel like I need to, like, this needs to be way more concrete for me than it is right now, both in like what we want to get done and how much it's going to cost to do it, so that we can realistically figure out budget-wise what we can commit to.
I don't know what staff's expectation is, but I certainly think this is more of a both and not an or. So that this is a vision document of how we connect the broad bike infrastructure across the city. And I think we expect an implementation plan with dollar figures of like, hey, we want to prioritize these 5 actions for the next year. 2 years from now, we're going to do these other things. So I think I'm not hearing what you're saying, Aaron, is mutually exclusive from what Justine said. Now, staff, tell me if this is realistic to actually get both.
Well, I think the reason we want to do the conceptual plans on these corridors to link the areas of the city is so that we can engage in the community. These, traditionally in the city, those conversations have been very intense. And so we want to engage. Hopefully it will result in more clear support, frankly, than there has been in the past. That is the goal of this planning effort. You know, at the end of the day, the council will, you'll hear the public comment on these and sort of some of the things that Carrie mentioned, some of the, with cross sections, here's what will change on the street with bike facilities, get feedback on that. And if there's support, then we will proceed. If there are, major issues with it, then the council is going to have to sort of in the CACT with other allies and boards and commissions sort of work through those issues and then ultimately make decisions. But if they get into the plan with cross sections, then that is a big step forward towards implementation.
Okay. So, but what is most helpful, like from us, right? So there are 6 priority routes. Like, are we conceivably going to be able to study all 6 of these routes? Like, if I'm looking at this, I sort of am like, East Broad Street, that's a big thing to like bite off, and we have bus rapid transit, so shouldn't those be like integrated? Maybe East Broad Street should come off this list, like Great Falls Street. I don't know, I mean, some of the data, if it's Strava data or something like that, maybe showing Great Falls Street because like it's always the detour route. So I don't know if like the trips are actually higher on Great Falls Street because it becomes the detour for the trail. So if I'm thinking about like, I don't necessarily want streets that are parallel with an existing trail to become like the priority route, as opposed to like taking a loop off the priority route into a different district, or figuring out what are the feeder routes into the trail or into like Lincoln, if that's what we're doing with already adding like a bike facility through the Greening of Lincoln project. So like, where are the connectors as opposed to like 6 kind of seemingly random routes in the city?
Random seems
I know harsh, but I mean, I'm not,
a little harsh.
that's my
because,
reaction
there was
to
a
it.
thought process, both based on data as well as public input as to why these 6 corridors are on the list. And then the east-west connection to Meridian, that's a foregone conclusion, and that's already funded to do more detailed conceptual plans. That is a really important one. I would say let's let this process go forward. The main point of this discussion is for the council to sort of embrace that this conversation is going to be happening at the street level with residents who live on these streets, and be prepared for that, and to listen, but also engage, because that's a really important dialogue.
Can we just clarify on that east-west connection, when it says West Falls Church, that's the secondary route you're referencing? I think secondary campus route.
Yeah.
Just because if you don't know, you don't know. I think it's a lot clearer. People
Sort of
say
brand
safe
that
roads to
as-
school, like
Calling it secondary campus route.
yeah, secondary campus route. Because even I was like, oh wait, West Falls Church. That means all the way through to the high school and the middle school, correct?
That's the
So
connection.
I would rename that something that if somebody's looking at them, they understand that's the school route. Because that was my first comment. I think that's one we've been talking about the longest in the city. At least.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Carrie, for this presentation. I just have 3 questions. One is, last time we had a work session, Ms. Underhill was asking really good questions about the width of the lanes on Lincoln Avenue, and if there could be a lane and a bike path in there as part of it. And when it snowed, the plow would be wide enough to clear both the driving lane and the bike lane, which is something I had never thought of before, I thought it was a very good idea. So what I'm wondering is there, and I didn't see it in this plan, is there anything in this plan that addresses bike lanes or narrowing driving lanes so that we can add bike lanes in areas where there aren't any?
Yeah, I mean, we can add additional routes sort of to that future, that map of future routes.
It's not
in the
necessarily
plan.
additional routes.
For the 6 that are enumerated, we will be doing cross-sections that will do exactly what you're asking.
Okay. But then is there a way in to say, as we are going forward, we want to make sure that this is something we keep doing? I guess that's my question.
Meaning on additional routes or on these 6 routes?
The width, right.
Right.
So can we say that in there, that we would like the driving lane to be 9 feet wide going forward so that there's room for bikes and cars?
Where there's a bike lane. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we'll take it.
We can look at
Design by design.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one thing, my hope would be that would be also part of a complete streets. I mean, it would be great to be part of the bike master plan, but having some sort of like standard, like when a road is this wide, these are the sorts of things we generally try to do with flexibility as needed.
It's just like the traffic calming. I think it's a policy choice, right? We say we want traffic calming devices like bump outs and speed bumps, but we want them to be compatible with bike, usage. Just like we want the driving lane to be narrower so that we are compatible with bike lane if possible. So I think it's a policy decision that you're hearing from council say we would like, or some of us would
right.
like.
Right. There you go. Thank
And
you.
it'd be great to be part of this plan if possible.
Okay, my second one is just, as you're doing community engagement and we're out there on the streets talking to people, can there be signs around the neighborhood or things that people will see so that you're not just talking to people who happen to be on the street at the moment that you're there? So just from an outreach engagement perspective.
we can look into yard signs.
Okay, just something along those lines. And then the last one is just, the last time we did this plan in 2015, there was such hue and cry about Southwest Street. And I believe I remember a former council member saying, oh, I couldn't have gotten elected to council and then have to worry about what's going to change on my street with the parking in front of so I think that's a bold choice to go after Southwest Street as one of the options, because there is a history there of changes. And so whatever happens on Southwest Street, I just want to make sure that community is fully engaged and understanding of what's going to happen.
Other questions? Dave?
Sure, thanks a lot. one of the things that you do when you're planning transportation infrastructure is to do an origin destination study. Has that been done? In other words, where are bicyclists starting and where are they ending their trips? That's fundamental to determining where you allocate transportation resources. Carrie, was that ever done here?
We did do an origin destination analysis through that existing conditions study, which is attached to the packet tonight.
Okay. So is this plan consistent with the origin destination study data?
Yeah. So the sort of the routes that are on the list that's recommended do help to provide connectivity between these isolated clusters and allow people to get from A to B where they, yeah.
Right. Well,
So.
no, the question is, do we know where bicyclists are starting from and where they're going now? I can follow up with you, if I might, through the city manager. I want to make sure that we've done that study and that we're in fact coming up with a program that reflects that. The second thing is there are whole parts of the city without sidewalks, and we have speeding in those parts of the city, and yet what we seem to be doing, and it's not necessarily bad, but there seems to be a focus on streets with car traffic, which makes sense. But what we're missing is the intentionality of where the destinations that we really want to make it convenient and safe for bicyclists to go. For example, connection to East Falls Church Metro. I don't see much of that here. For example, is Columbia on this, or Van Buren, are they on this map? So it's questions like that, and the connection to the school is good and West Falls Church, but the connection to Oak Street Elementary, in other words, we seem to be, and it's a legitimate concern, we seem to be reflecting where the stress is, and I understand that, but are we reflecting where in the future we want to make sure that we have good bike connection? And it seems to me to the metro stations, to the WOD, to the schools, to our shopping areas, and I don't see that in this plan. What I see is a reaction to current conditions, which is a legitimate concern because we know current conditions are dangerous and we want to clearly address that. But what I don't see here is a strategy reflected in this document that would connect people to places that they're going to want to go, and we want to really encourage it to be safe for biking, as well as walking, by the way. Anyway, that's a comment. Perhaps I can follow up with the city manager, but anyway, those are a couple of the thoughts that I had. Thank you.
Other comments? Okay, I had a few. So I actually agree with Dave's comments because I had noted that one of the comments made in the past was about connections from the WNOD for the purposes of economic development opportunity and how to connect to businesses. And so maybe that's the Great Falls, Little Falls route, but I think that's, in general, broadening that is thinking about current, present day, and future kind of destinations and how to get people comfortably to those, I think is an important lens to apply. If I could, so when this was first done in 2015, it was before most of our time, and so I appreciate, Kara, your work in picking this back up, knowing that this will be a tough one in the community. If I could suggest a priority, I do think that what we are now rebranding as a secondary campus route will be a really good one because it might be less controversial, and I think most people can get on board with the idea of getting kids safely to school. And so I think it's just good to, for emotionally and for change management reasons for the community, to get one solid win under our belt before we go and tackle something really tough like Southwest Street. And so if I could suggest, extra focus on getting that one done well, done right, and it's the first priority, I think that would be a great win for biking in general for the city. My other comment has to do with the 3 existing bike lanes we have, Roosevelt, Hillwood, and Maple. I've ridden my bike on all 3 of them. They don't feel great. I know officially when I looked at the NACTO guide, it does not call for protected bike lanes there because of the speed and volumes. But if you go out there and stand there yourself, it doesn't feel safe. And so I wonder whether as part of this bike master plan, we can evaluate whether there's an ability to protect them because they're already there. And if it requires extra width in the street, maybe we can move to 9-foot wide, car lanes. But adding some extra flexi posts there will, given that we already have real estate on the road for bike lanes and they're not being used, my sense is because they're not very safe feeling. If we can protect them, that's another kind of low-hanging fruit thing that we can go out there and do sooner than later and get people, again, used to the idea of like, oh, this is a bike lane. I see a solid win out in the community. And there's an element of chicken and egg here, right? Because if you kind of build it, then they'll start riding. And so measuring kind of where usage happens today isn't a great metric, in my opinion, because we don't have many routes that are safe feeling. So that would be my second suggestion is let's look at the 3 existing bike routes and figure out whether we can protect them. That should be theoretically low cost to do, given that we already have real estate on there. And then the third one, outside of the 5 or 6 priority routes, is I know that this is our first year in submitting for the bike-friendly community that we've gotten comments on. But I guess as part of the bike master plan, I would like to see what other steps would it take for us to reach silver or gold status by a certain time frame and set a really audacious goal out there, because I don't think it's just about bike routes. I think there's education components, there's involving businesses, and so I think as part of this comprehensive plan, it'd be great for us to think more broadly about reaching for a goal like that beyond these 5 routes. So overall, excited to take on this work and let us know how we can support you, Carrie.
Great, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Justine's got one more
I
comment.
just wanted to plus one what Letty said about also CACT, Aaron, a lot of people said about low-hanging fruit, and also about setting a goal for what sort of status we want for a bike-friendly community.
Great. Okay. Thanks again, Carrie.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to our third item, we have mixed-use development fiscal impact report. Thank you, Aaron and Art, for joining us. And we'd welcome members of the EDA and EDO staff to join us at the table.
And so Becky Witzman is going to give us the report. What's been provided to the council is the report that was sent out last November and October. And so we wanted to just take the opportunity to walk the council through the data when we go back and look at projects, and we can actually measure the actual revenues and measure the pupil generation, and then the other costs still remain modeled because it's very hard to know exactly what share of a project has of the city council's time or DPW's time, so that remains a modeled construct on the cost side. But it is good data. We use it in our planning for the future. And so Becky, let me turn it over to you. And we also have our guest from Tischler Bice who's here with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Wyatt.
So good evening, Mayor Hardy and members of City Council. I'm here this evening to provide you with a brief overview of our net annual mixed-use development fiscal impact report for calendar year 2022. The report includes lots of detailed information on our newer mixed-use projects, but the primary reason that we create the report is to periodically calculate the total net fiscal impact of our newer mixed-use projects. So this project includes analysis of 301 West Broad, the Harris Teeter Building, the Spectrum, the Byron, the Broadway, 455 at Tinner Hill, the Reed Building, Northgate, Pearson Square, and this year Founders Row 1 has been included for the first time. We have not done this analysis work alone, as we have worked closely with the staff and the Commissioner of the Revenue's Office, the Real Estate Assessor's Office, and the Treasurer's Office. And I should give a big shout out to Naomi Goodwin on our staff, who was a huge part of this report this time. So with me tonight as well is another major contributor to our model efforts over the years, Julie Hurlins. She's with Tischler Bice, And they're the firm that created the model for us, and Julie's worked side by side with us for many years to update and improve the model. So jumping in to talk about how this report was compiled. The actual revenues compiled for this 2-document report, both a Word document and an Excel document, include actual calendar year 2022 real estate taxes, sales taxes, meals taxes, business taxes, vehicle taxes, business personal property taxes, and bank franchise taxes that were generated in these 9 buildings. And it also includes a few minimal model-generated revenues for the types of actual revenues that can't be assigned to each building separately, such as utility taxes. In the way of expenses in this report, the report includes the actual cost of the exact number of pupils in each building per school data that we receive. So the exact number of pupils in each building times the actual annual per pupil city cost of $19,084 is included. The rest of the expenses generated for this analysis are other city service costs, and those expenses are model generated. So in addition to the staff report that was posted, we have provided 4 attachments. Attachment 1 is this lovely, colorful Excel spreadsheet with very tiny font on it, and it includes lots and lots of information and data on the 9 projects. Attachment number 2 is a Word document that summarizes and provides highlights of the data in attachment 1. It also includes an example of what model-generated expenses look like for the buildings, with an example of the Broadway, where there are 80 residential units and 6 pupils, and the total expenses for that building in this report amount to $407,347. Attachment 3 to the staff report provides an example of the updated model net annual fiscal impact results of the Quinn project, which is now $1.1 million, with the line item specifics of both the projected revenues and expenses. And finally, attachment 4 provides details of actual revenues that will have been received by the city for the Broad and Washington project through 2024. To provide information on the city fees generated prior to the Broad and Washington building being occupied. Altogether, those revenues will be around $2.65 million. Other important information about the report to highlight. We use the most recently updated model version from July 18th of 2022. The current city real estate tax rate of $1.23 was used. In our prior report, it was 1.355. The actual total real estate value of the 9 projects is $786,291,700. The primary voluntary concessions of the 9 projects have been $8.85 million in school capital, 99 ADUs, 9 workforce units, and contributions to the library, parks, utility undergrounding, and others. 2,531,162 square feet of total new commercial space from these 9 projects has been added to the city as a result of these projects. And lastly, the primary result of the report is that in calendar year 2022, the net annual fiscal impact of the 9 newer mixed-use buildings was approximately $4,458,742. And with that brief overview of the mixed-use net annual fiscal impact report, Julie and I would be happy to try to answer any questions that anybody may have about either the report or the model. A lot of information.
Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome.
Who's got questions? We haven't been shy so far, so.
You all wore them down.
Yeah. Dave?
Sure. So the model for a given project, when you're projecting what it will generate for purposes of the decision by the council, does that model assume that all the commercial occupancies will be totally filled and operating on day one.
It does, but I'll let Julie speak to how the model was created and the purposes for which it was intended to be used.
Right. Yep. It's good to be with you here this evening. Thank you for the question. So the model is developed to determine the impact at build out. So you're doing current, either comparing potentially a current state of affairs, current situation, current conditions versus a future condition. And so, but all of those assumptions are variable in the model. So the user can make those assumptions about occupied versus unoccupied, but it is meant to say, as it is proposed, with some modifications in terms of valuations, and I think it's been city's practice to be conservative on valuations and sales tax assumptions, but as it's built out, what's the stabilized net impact? But that also does include the cost side as well. So it's not only modeling the revenues, it's modeling the cost and full impact of the costs as well. So that's all of those costs which are attributed to non-residential as well, if that's where this discussion is headed.
But let me go back to the question. The question is, when we're given a prediction revenue for approval of a special exception project based upon the model, is the number we're given assuming that the commercials, that the retail or the restaurant or the whatever it is that's part of the project is generating revenue on day one?
Day one of the construction, no, it's on build out.
On build out.
Yeah,
At
when
build
it's
out.
full, yeah, when it's
The
occupied.
only point that I'm trying to get to is we have mixed-use project after mixed-use project where the commercial spaces are not occupied for years and sometimes haven't been occupied at all. And I'm trying to figure out how the model handles that. And it sounds like the model doesn't handle that.
Well, the model can handle that if you choose to run that type of assumption.
Sort of like a vacancy rate or something.
Mhm, sure.
But so plain and simple, we assume full build out stabilization. That's what we use for the model. As Becky noted in her memo, if the developer says, hey, there's going to be restaurants, but the VCs don't guarantee X square feet of restaurant, we don't assume it's going to be restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
But if it is backed by a voluntary concession that says it shall be a restaurant, then we calculate that as a restaurant use in the retail area.
Even though the restaurant may not be occupied for years.
Yeah, and so I would say, like, if you look at the report that Becky has prepared, if you look at some of the projects that do have some of those vacancies, and we could take Lincoln as an example. When this was before the council, we projected 604,000 to 1.1 net fiscal impact. And the actual that we are now reporting is $258,000 net fiscal impact. So there it is, and we can try to break it down further, but we have some vacancies and.
Well, and the good news is vacancies by the end of this year should hopefully go away. That building should be fully occupied.
The second area is cost. So we've calculated the pupil costs. Have we calculated the police costs, the fire costs? In what ways?
Example.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what the model does, I think, is one of
Have
the key
we
things.
confirmed that that's an accurate prediction?
Well, I mean,
we're talking about a model here, so I'm asking you questions about the model.
So, here's my take on it, and others might have their views on it. If you take a year like when 301 West Broad and Lincoln, both of those came online, we did not grow our police budget by the amount that was projected.
Actually, $100,000 in the model for
It
expense
didn't
for
grow.
police.
Those were years where, other than the new construction, the economy was not very strong, and so our budgets were flat in that era. And so we did not take on those costs. But we do know that calls for service are increasing, so I have been coming to council to ask for additional police. And so we could try to sort of circle back. I think some of our department directors would like us to tie budget growth more directly to what we model. We typically under budget relative to the model. at least, like the year those projects come online. Now, whether it catches up with us over time, that would need a little bit more analysis for us to kind of get to that.
And then one other question. We just heard a presentation this evening about increased sewer costs. Have those been figured into the model?
So sewer cost is not, this is really as a general fund tax issue. And so we really should have our rates set for developers to pay for the cost of acquisition and system expansion. And
So we should, agree.
yeah. And we do, but we are, when we talk finances for this sort of combination of things that the county is going to be asking us to do on shaving the peak of our peak flows and things like that, we're going to have a gap. And so that's what we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and figure out how to solve. Those added costs are things that we did not anticipate when we set our rates. And that is something that the county, frankly, has sort of injected into this discussion late, I would say, in those discussions.
Thank you.
Debbie?
So one option, would be to adjust the model manually to make, run different scenarios of when it's reaching, when we anticipate full occupancy, to Mr. Snyder's point. And then is the model also malleable or are we able to modify it to represent, you can tell me why we wouldn't want to or would want to, the revenue increase on our real estate assessment. So as soon as the building's torn down, like you're looking at Broad in Washington, $2.981 million is a significant tax increase over what was paid on the property before. In your modeling, Julie, have you done any work with that? Have you added another category that shows here's a revenue that's received on your real estate assessment?
For the new use, I'm
Right, for the new use. So we tore down the building before it was valued at, there's a listing in here somewhere around what it was valued at, and now it's anticipated its value will increase to $46 million just in the real estate. You can see the list of our fees. That's revenue that we wouldn't be getting otherwise, right? So if you're looking at the full revenue and the full cost, we should be looking at the full revenue.
Correct. Yes.
So if your revenue is delayed and deferred on the tax base or the occupancy base, is that offset by your fees and your increased real estate assessment, which is being paid from day one?
Right, so again, the way that the model has been used and built is on the stabilized, when it's built. And so that's new value, the ongoing fees. You'll see the sort of year one and then the year two that's highlighted. That's the stabilized year. Again, it's sort of not necessarily happening in year two, but it's just a representation of being built out and when it's built. And but yes, it's based on the new valuation. So the assessed value when built, along with those other revenues that are listed there as well.
And usually in the staff report, we provide information on what the pre-development value is, the location, for instance. In the case of Broad in Washington, total revenues in 2017 were roughly $300,000, and we didn't even try to forecast expenses. So that's all we were yielding. That was real estate taxes, stormwater, business license taxes, some meals taxes from Applebee's. So that's usually part of the staff report you receive, is that, today, here's what we're receiving versus what we're looking at if we build this new build.
And I guess I'm just thinking about the questions of when your costs are incurred, when is your revenue incurred as well, and there's some complicating factors. Because we have these larger projects that we haven't had before, like I'm also thinking about West Falls and the permit fees that we've taken in for West Falls. But yet, some of the openings are delayed beyond what our original projections were. So just trying to make sure we're making the best decisions for the city when deciding on these developments in recognition of when the revenue is going to start, when full occupancy is expected to be, what additional costs are, sanitary, sewer, whatever, moving forward. Those are kind of key pieces of information I want to make sure we're keeping in totality.
And I think we've attempted to encourage the commercial build-outs sooner by tying occupancy permits to those revenues. I think we're doing that on the Quinn project. I know we did it on Founders too. That is a tough one to predict though, because developers typically, build-out costs are significant in a new build-out for commercial space. So they try to avoid those costs as long as they can. And they want to fill the residential units so they can recoup the money that they've expended to date. So, I think there's a question of whether we can do that better. I know that's something you've discussed is, can we get the space filled quicker? And that would certainly be preferable.
Okay, other questions? Erin?
I always find these ones really interesting. Thank you for all the data, and it's helpful to see, right? And the Broad in Washington project was interesting to see too. I didn't realize even what all those CPEDS fees looked like, right? And I was like, well, what would that cost, right? So thank you for all the illustrations. I guess my point goes to kind of what you were just talking about, and a little bit to what Mr. Snyder was asking, was that when I look at this, we often talk about the 4.4, net fiscal that comes in, or the 8.8, contribution to schools and the ADUs. And so we have, that whole piece of things, right? And all the primary benefits and ancillary benefits that come with the development. But then there's the, on the net fiscals related to what the projections were, we have 4 underperforming buildings. And we know Pearson Squares, from the pupil costs being higher than what was anticipated, but then and let's say Founders Row 1 is from, not stabilizing yet. But then we have Lincoln at Tinner Hill with kind of the persistent vacancies and underperforming, and then Northgate apparently with something related to kind of building value or depreciating building value
The
or
unit
something.
mix at Northgate is a little different than we're seeing today. It's closer to 50% two bedrooms, where typically we only see 30% two bedrooms. The unit mix, we've learned over the years, makes a significant difference.
Okay,
In terms of the pupil costs.
right. I thought there was something too with the
Yeah,
building
Northgate is a
value
little
at
different. It
Northgate.
goes
Okay.
further back. And I will say on the Lincoln project, part of the delta there was that, and this is a lesson that we learned over time, that Wyatt was alluding to, is they pretty well told us emphatically that we would get 50% of the ground floor space as a restaurant. But we didn't get that as a written voluntary concession.
Okay.
And so all these years, we've never had a restaurant in there until we finally will by the end of this year. So that's one of those lessons learned.
And that goes, to kind of my question on sort of, right now on those earlier projects, we've absorbed the risk, right? And I want to make sure that we transfer the risk as much as possible if they're underperforming, whether it's in the voluntary concessions, whether it's in the certificates of occupancy, and that even when we are seeing updates like this and we see something like 87.5% leased, to me, it's still an overstatement, because you have things like the movie theater that shows up as a large square footage of leased space, but we're getting no income, from that right now. And I'm not even sure if we're penalizing anyone for the delays that have been, associated with that development in particular. And it's just not a good look, so to speak, for the city to sort of have what seem to be languishing developments, even if, underperforming, non-stabilized, they're still bringing in, good businesses and interest in the city. And so kind of that's my big question is, maybe it's more a rhetorical question or something to take forward, but, lessons learned, and also how do we transfer risk and try to get some of that revenue. And, you don't want to penalize people, but at the same time, they're promising things and promising benefits that we're not seeing.
Well, and I will say Founders Row, ultimately, we will get 25,000 square feet of restaurant. So I would predict in the next several years, the meals taxes there will be significant, attributable in some part to the movie theater. I mean, a lot of those restaurants probably wouldn't have moved there without the movie theater. I mean, that's a huge anchor for that project. So, once things get going there, I'm hopeful that things will turn around with those numbers. But you're right, it's discouraging sometimes to.
Mary Beth, you were next.
Thank you for all this, Becky and Julie. A couple questions. One is, I'm looking at the colorful chart. So some of these things are set numbers that don't change, like what the gross tax revenue was from the previous uses. We know that that's not going to change. The amount of land that has been developed, not going to change. That's going to stay the same forever. And then some of them vary every year.
Right.
Right? So I'm wondering if this chart can be somehow show like what's a fixed one and what's a not fixed one.
Good point.
And one of the ones that, and it applies to both the pupil cost and the tax rate. So when we do our original estimate, we say, for example, Lincoln at Tinner Hill, we estimated 26 to 45 pupils, which last year in July 2020, I guess in 20, there were 25 pupils on this chart. But at the time, the cost per student was $1,000 less than it is now. So that skews it a little bit. And the same with the tax rate. So the assessed tax rate value that we predicted when tax was $1.37
Exactly.
is different than when tax is $1.23. So how does the model take all that into consideration?
An assessment increases.
Oh, right, and then the assessments increase, and we do assume that. So that's my first question.
So the model itself is evaluating a discrete project at any given time. So it's, you're evaluating the Quinn project or Founders Row, et cetera, and modifying some of those assumptions to test some of the voluntary concessions, some of the, the commitments, the valuations, the student generation rates. So from this point forward, what would this do? What would the impact be to the city? It is honestly not meant to be a budget forecasting tool. It is not built to be then taken and put into the budget office and build a budget off of that. As Wyatt mentioned, the police expenditures. The model is modeling current levels of service. When you build the model, this is what the budget is funding. This is how much you're providing in public safety costs. This project that we're modeling is consuming this amount of public safety costs. And this is what the cost is. That doesn't mean you're going to necessarily hire net new officers the next budget year. So this report, which is, we get asked this a lot. So we do this work around the country. We've been in business for 40 years. I've been doing this for 20 years. So we get asked this a lot. How can you go backwards? Let's go backwards and look at the projects that we've approved and what does that look like? And I always point to Falls Church because this is one of the few communities that does this because of those reasons. Because the budget changes every year, the tax rate changes every year, the assessed values changes every year. All of those assumptions change in the future. And so to go backwards to then unwind what you had modeled back then is exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
So it's to their credit, to your credit and to economic development and the city's credit that this has been a tool that's consistently been used over the years, been consistent with the way that it's been reported, but it does bring up those questions as you alluded to, and that's why in some of the reporting of looking at, well, if you assumed the tax rate of when this was approved, the revenues would have been that much more because the tax rate has gone down, right? So, and some of your costs have gone up, right? So, yes, so exactly,
So there's always moving parts and up and
exactly.
down. Yeah.
So there's a lot to unwind, not that this isn't a valuable thing and tool and piece of, set of information, but it does have, you'll see, more and more, each year, more and more footnotes, more and more qualifiers because those things change year over year.
Right. Okay, another question. Has the Kensington ever been modeled in here?
Should not ever put it on this chart. I
Okay.
think we have done it, but not recently.
Okay. But we did it when we first approved it, or did it have a different?
And we've done like the Hilton
Different.
Garden Inn, for instance, separately, but those aren't technically.
Traditional mixed use.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Kensington's a little, but now we're going to have 3 senior living projects. Do they need their own
That's a good, yeah.
separate category?
they have higher costs in some ways and lower costs in people.
Right.
Overall lower costs.
And then my last one, and I'm guessing that Letty's going to ask this question too, but I'll ask first, which is just about that overtime question. So if you look at the students by dwelling unit that we get from the schools every year, it shows like, this is where we were in this year, and it shows all those different years. Is there a way to turn some of this into that over time? So we could say in 2017, the Reed Building was here, and in 2019, it's here, and in 2024, it's here. So to be able to show that a little bit, like with ratios or something, or however, I can almost picture it, but not exactly.
I kind of picture it as a companion piece to this. What
Right.
the schools, what you all do,
Yeah,
showing the progress over time.
right. And it could be a chart, and then Letty talks about
It's an
the
XY
graph.
chart where like a graph where like time and then, no, not a 2x2 as much as I would like one, but essentially your revenues over line and your expenses over line, and your delta between
Right.
your revenue expenses, your net fiscal impact. We model it when it's stabilized, say year 3, right? If year 0 is groundbreaking, year 3 is when it's stabilized, it'd be great to track over time and show how much that delta might change.
Right. And then it would also show, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What Mr. Snyder's asking is, when is it stabilized? Is it year 3? Is it year 7 with 455 at Tinner Hill? Is it year
Right.
10? Whatever that is. When does it stabilize?
Yeah.
And then you
And
can
then-
kind of lay that.
When does it depreciate?
Right.
Full life cycle.
Right.
Do you have other questions?
No, that's it.
Okay. Others? Caroline?
Yeah, so I really appreciate this, and I just, a risk transfer model is completely different than a revenue model. And I think that what we want, as council ideally is we're data hungry. I think part of it is just perhaps why we need to take into consideration just expanding the models, right? Because I feel like the expectation is being banked into a model that needs to be aligned with what it can deliver. So I heard risk transfer, I heard the ability to forecast, and I don't know of any organization that just has one model. I mean, I come from Freddie Mac, and we model the heck out of everything, and we have hundreds of models, not like we need to spend money for that. So I just want to put out there that perhaps, we, and I put this out to the EDA, right, that we define a continuum of maturity for how we model things that kind of meets some of the feedback that I've heard, like, 5 people in onto this, right? This is a static model. Like, I'm hearing people want to put variables in it, but resoundingly, as I look at as you talk to me, like, what you're telling me is, it is fixed. There's nothing variable in this model. But yet we're expecting to variabilize.
To clarify, I think I don't want to bastardize the model. I think the model is
Yeah.
meant to be for a point in time when the project is stabilized. I
Correct.
think what I'm proposing, or what Mary Beth and I have talked about, is how do you show your actual revenues and expenses over time and compare that against what we projected originally.
So, great, on
The
Letty's
actuals.
point, can you produce that out of the model now? I don't
guess I
think
would.
so.
I
Like you
would
make it
say-
sound like it's easy, I tell you, it is constrained. That is not how it's built. So my point being is, I hear you, and I can't, not arguing, I think that's a great idea. I just want us all to realize that the model we have is great, and maybe it's time to create different models for different purposes, and perhaps our expectations aren't aligned to what this model can do. So I agree that would be great. You will not get it from this model.
So I will say
So-
this, I've heard that comment before, both about long-term forecasting as well as sort of year to year. I would challenge the council to say, why do you want that? How will that govern your policy choices? Because it is hugely labor intensive. And so, I think it is worth pausing to ask that question.
So I don't want to forecast futures. I want actuals. Like, for example, the Broadway is 20 years old now,
Pulling
right?
out by project, all these revenues is, it's a massive effort. That's the reason we don't do this every year. We do it, kind of every other year, every 4 years, I mean, it's, to break all these revenues out by building, it requires the commissioner and all the people that Becky named, they got to sit down and really grind it. So I'm just pause a little bit. I mean, this is, I think Julie would attest, we have more data on development than most jurisdictions. We look at this more closely in the connection of land use decisions than most jurisdictions do. What additional things do we need in terms of policy to help guide policy? I have always been curious, what is the long-term trajectory on these things 30 years out? I think that's an interesting question. It's going to be hugely speculative based on assumptions you could argue with kind of forever. And at the end of the day, does that really govern your policy decisions?
I think
that's a struggle that I have when I think about these things.
Yeah, so my opinion is I think when we make SC entitlement decisions, it should be for a point in time when the project is stabilized. I think introducing the year 0 to year 3 or what looks like in 20 years, that's way too complicated. So I don't think we're asking for a forecast as part of that decision making. I think what we have for the model makes sense. I think what is a useful exercise is to look at the data for, say, our oldest project. The Broadway is 20 years old at this point.
Yeah.
I think there's been concerns in the past that once a project reaches that point, you start depreciating values, you might have more students move in because it becomes more affordable, and it drives up our costs and decreases revenues. Given that we do this report card every 2 years or so, we probably have data on what the Broadway has done. We probably have 10 data points, right? So can we just chart that out and show that, like, over time, revenues have not tanked and expenses have not increased? That's my guess, because we've seen the Broadway consistently perform. That's kind of one reason why I think it'd be helpful to have that longitudinal view. The other is in that year 0 to year 3, I think there's a common misconception that when the ground floor of the building is vacant, it essentially is a money loser for the city. And I think as evidenced by the Broad and Washington project, which I think is attachment 3, as well as the Quinn project. The Quinn project being, I think, 67% of the net fiscal impact is from just property taxes alone. So even if the entire ground floor of the Quinn project is vacant, 67% of the value still comes from just having a new building. So that's important, right? The Broad and Washington example illustrates that just in one-time permit fees, we've gotten $1.7 million in CPED's fee, another $300,000 in DPW fees. So $2 million just in one-time fees. And then even while it's under construction, in those years 0 to year 3, we are getting real estate taxes every year. So even when there's unoccupied, new building coming on the ground, we are still collecting taxes on it. So that picture, that full life cycle picture, is important to illustrate those 2 points, is that even when the project is not yet stabilized, we are collecting a bunch of taxes and no expenses. And then even after a project is stabilized and old, say 20 years, 30 years, hopefully the revenue and expenditures, picture is pretty stable and we don't see it degrading. But I think for the purpose of decision making, I think fiscal impact at a point in time makes sense. I think showing that longitudinal view is helpful for us because as we've gotten more sophisticated, this is a council that's going to want more data. And I think it's just important to tell that full story of what does a project look like from beginning at, when we do groundbreaking to when, the building's halfway through its life cycle.
Madam Mayor, I think you're right. I would add the comment that Councilmember Leon made about a risk transfer study is well put. We know, for example, in the West End, that we gave back $7 million within several months after the West End deal was signed. We know that in case of Founders Road 1, there have been multiple givebacks. So I think that sort of history of risk shifting from developers to the city is very relevant because a lot of these projects are not just financial decisions, but they're community decisions where we're giving up zoning control to a developer in return for financial return, which we now know is often delayed, and for certain components in that project that the community wants to have. So I couldn't agree more with a more fulsome financial model. But I also, for policymaking, I think the public needs to know more about the history of each of these projects. What were the initial assumptions? What were the initial contracts? And what did the city give back to the developer over the course of that project?
I will say that is a broader discussion than fiscal impact analysis with the land use case. I mean, those are, the specifics of West End with the negotiations on that. It's kind of a special case. And I mean, we can tell that story, although I will submit that we did every change with multiple public hearings and town hall sessions and presented everything open book so that the public could follow along with those changes and make judgments on them and hold us accountable to it. To me, the risk discussion, it's really clear. I mean, like if you want to look at it, the reason we produced this report, and you just take the Lincoln, we projected 604,000 to 1.1, and we're getting 258. That's it. It's not much more complicated than that. Now that's going to change over time. Those ground floor uses hopefully are going to be more successful than they were when this study was done. That was a particularly bad time.
Fresh market backing out.
So I would submit the ground floor retail, what happens on the ground floor does matter. It matters to the city. It's pretty clear. I mean, it's what it looks like when it's vacant.
I think that risk transfer
It's going to vary from project to project, but it's not hidden. It's right in front of us.
I think that risk transfer discussion is when we do this report card and we have a lesson learned of like, oh gosh, we really do, if we're going to account for a restaurant, it needs to reflect that in the model. We need to have it in the VCs as well, right? Like we don't count it as, we don't count meals tax there unless it's actually committed to. That's a lesson learned. But a risk transfer discussion, I think, is essentially how do we up our game in negotiations and not a modeling exercise per se, in my opinion.
Yeah, we always call it as the making sure that we stay aligned. We're aligned when the council votes. Let's make sure that we stay aligned 3 years later when they're delivering the project. It's time to fill out the commercial aspects of it.
Throw COVID into the equation and cost of building materials and interest rates and all those things change.
Right.
So, from staff's perspective, we work very hard to hold the developers accountable for what they say. And the stronger the VCs are on those, the better. And so Founders Row did have certificates of occupancy tied to the retail performance. Those are very difficult negotiations. Lord have mercy. And sometimes, we push as hard as we can. I think we learn with every project to push to maintain that alignment.
Well, and we're conservative with inputs too, and I'll give you an example. The Broad and Washington project with the Whole Foods, they wanted credit for 11,000 square feet of mezzanine space. They wanted sales tax credit for that space. We said, no, you're not going to be doing any sales up in that mezzanine space. They wouldn't say what they were going to do up there, but it's most likely going to be dining space.
Right.
So they got real estate credit for those 11,000 square feet, but they didn't get sales tax credit for that 11,000 square feet, nor should they have. But, we're pretty tough with developers. When they come in, we don't just take their word for things. We'll, take away common areas that aren't producing meals taxes and different things. So it's a pretty conservative exercise on our part anyway.
I neglected to ask the EDA members if they had comments or questions. Okay.
Yes.
Giving him a microphone. Process 958.
We're regretting giving you a mic.
I want to start with this. I do this type of work for a living as well. I've actually presented at VML to other jurisdictions and newly electeds that are struggling with forecasting economic development and fiscals. And I will say that out of probably the 36 jurisdictions that I've worked with and talked with about this type of modeling, Falls Church is by far light years ahead. Certainly other jurisdictions of even close to comparable size. So it is a fairly sophisticated analysis and data-driven analysis, comparatively speaking. There are a couple things that I also wanted to just reference when looking at these numbers. Each one of these properties tells a story, but I think what's really important to recognize is the history of assessment methodology in the city. I've been doing real estate tax work in the DMV for 20 years. Falls Church, in many cases, up until our current assessor arrived, had a very different approach to the way that real estate was valued. Generally speaking, commercial real estate in the state of Virginia is assessed based on the income that it produces, not the retail sales, but the actual rent that it achieves. It's a direct capitalization model, so it's the same way that an investor would underwrite the value of a project. They look at the rent. They look at the rent that they can achieve, less a stabilized vacancy number, less operating expenses, and then they use a capitalization rate loaded with the tax rate to come up with a value. So basically taking net operating income of the property as an investment and using a capitalization rate, which is subjective, to come up with the market value. Now, the state of Virginia has what's called uniformity and equalization guidelines, which is very different than Maryland and also very different than Washington, D.C. And what that means is that they gather information from taxpayers, who, by the way, are asked to provide that information, but there is no penalty for providing that information. Unlike Maryland and D.C., where if you don't provide that information, you're actually penalized, and in some cases threatened with a misdemeanor. So all of the assessors around the state send out these requests prior to an assessment, typically in the spring if it's an annual reassessment, and they request this financial information. Some provide it, some don't. Then they go out to the market and they survey what's happening, and they pull a lot of the same information that someone would if they were putting together a fiscal impact analysis. They take all that information, they throw it into a meat grinder, and then they come up with kind of a grid of data. And then they use that data to come up with an assessment. Some of the information is very, I would say, very specific and accurate. Others is more of like going to surgery with a machete as opposed to a scalpel, like the same intended effect, just not incredibly accurate. So there is some subjectivity associated with how those valuations are produced. Irving Bailey showed up from Arlington County. I've known Irving for at least 10 years. I have a ton of respect for him. He's a very, very smart guy. He brought what I will say a bit more of a sophisticated, data-driven approach to assessments. And that's no knock on the way that assessments are done in the past. It's simply that when you don't have a lot of transaction data within a 2.2 square mile radius, you don't really have great data to work with. And if you're not seeking what's happening outside of the jurisdiction and trying to draw comparisons, it's very hard to do that. So what I'm saying is that if you were to look at the assessment history of large commercial properties in the city, what you will see is that there's been a drastic change over the last 18 to 24 months in some cases as to the values that have been attributed to those commercial assets, specifically mixed use. I'm not going to name names about any projects, but I was just looking at the assessment on one project, and for the period of 2016 to 2019, the assessed value on that project did not change, which the assessed value, even through uniformity and equalization guidelines in the state of Virginia, is supposed to be based on a representation of fair market value, meaning what an investor would pay for that, with a little bit of extra sauce thrown in because taxable value doesn't always equate investment value, but supposed to at least have some approximation to it. And then for 2020 through 2021, it increased 2%. Bob knows this because he works in real estate. If you own a new mixed-use apartment building, the idea that your market value is a stabilized asset, right? It was stabilized, at least from the residential portion, would not change that much over that period is, I think, probably incongruent with what's happening in the market. 2023, value goes up, reflecting a recent purchase prices. So some of these, it's a long way of saying that the way that the methodology exists for commercial real estate has been different over the last couple of years. So what you're going to see going forward, I think, on these new mixed-use projects is the real estate taxes are going to be higher with a slightly different change in methodology. And some of these projects, even going back to 2022 and 5 years prior to that, probably don't generate as strong of real estate taxes. So I just wanted to explain that methodology. It is purely driven on the performance. To Councilman Snyder's comment about ramp up and a couple of others that flagged that as well, the fiscal models that we put together, or that I put together, take into consideration ramp up. There's what's called an absorption period for commercial real estate. Generally speaking, in the current market conditions, that absorption period for lease up of retail and commercial space, even for something with ground floor, in most cases is almost 2.5 years. So you're picking up revenue over time, assuming chunks of space are being leased. I understand that the city looks at it from a stabilized perspective, which if you are trying to use it from a budgeting, for a budgeting exercise, that would be the right way to do it. But if you're looking at a detailed fiscal impact model, you're taking into consideration that absorption time frame, so you're not making as much money because no one's leasing a building or delivering a building turnkey and all the commercial space is leased. Certainly not now, and it definitely hasn't been that way for the last couple of years. Also, the fiscal impact models should, in my opinion, be taking into consideration all of the other ancillary fees that are being generated, whether it's permitting and the land value. And then I'm going to mention two other things, and then I will stop talking. The land value of each entitled project should theoretically change significantly the following assessment year after that project has been approved. There is a lot of money to be made by developers simply entitling a project, not even building the project, not even generating revenue from the project, but taking a project through the rezoning process. And I know that that is not news to anybody here. There are developers that do nothing but that, right? Seek entitlement, get it rezoned. There's a lift in the land value, and then they turn around and sell it to somebody else to build it. So most of these projects, the following year, and I know Irving is all over this, those values for that land will increase significantly. And if it was anything other than zoned for apartments and there's a mixed use component, that value is going to go up. And I think that that's something that should be taken into consideration if you want to throw the permit fees out. That land lift value is very real. And in some cases, you'll see sales of these properties in between entitlement and when they're actually constructed. Probably not as much here because we don't have a lot of that, but that is something to take in consideration. And then the other thing, the last thing that I'll mention is that, and Becky's right, that you should not attribute restaurant and bar sales per square foot to commercial space unless it's been absolutely guaranteed. Because the difference in sales and meals tax between a restaurant and a retail service is massive. Chipotle's will generate over $1,000 per square foot in sales. Average for much of the rest of the retail industry is like 300. So it matters the type of tenant, and it matters whether it's a restaurant or not. So you're right to do that. What I would say is if you're looking at commercial projects and you want to see how much pure revenue is driven off of the use types and the commercial, it would be helpful to get as specific as possible about the sales per square foot that are generated by different tenant types, because that can make a massive difference when you're evaluating the value of a commercial component versus a profile of another. So it's a long way of saying what Becky is doing now, along with our consultant, is far better than what we see in other jurisdictions. You can take these models to an nth degree. There are softwares that do this. I get paid by jurisdictions and developers, investors to produce these, and it can get very, very detailed, very complicated. But there are things that we can refine in the model and things that should be taken into consideration, questions that should be asked as part of the process, which oftentimes are, which is what's the type of retail tenant going in there? You know, what are we modeling in terms of the ramp up? And then also that look back on the real estate taxes, really kind of have to look at through the lens of the assessment methodology that existed and kind of what's happened over the last couple of years. So stop talking.
Thank you, Ross, I think.
Sorry.
Just
10 minutes of one stream.
Well, I was also going to talk about the West Point too, but anyway. Well.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Thanks a lot for that. Very, very helpful. It does suggest that there's one other data point that we've never asked for, which is what is the profit the developer is making, so that we can better determine what's a reasonable ask to make in VCs and elsewhere.
I know Bob bristles at that question. So, because I've heard that question asked before, I will say that it is very challenging even for some developers to ask that question, because the fee structure, depending on the type of developer and the way that they've set up the deal, can differ. Looking, if fiscal impact model is challenging, looking at what's called a waterfall schedule as to what investors are getting, who gets what piece, who stays in the deal as a passive investor, who's part of the LP, the GP, who else is part of the capital stack, is incredibly challenging. What I can tell you, though, is that there is very good data out there that is gathered in a more surveyed approach to where you can say, okay, for a typical project of this size with this mix type, what can a developer expect to make as part of that? But each deal is going to change dramatically. And when you have, especially when you have assemblages like Founders Row, the assemblage of that site, I forget how many landowners were involved. And some of them stayed in the deal and got like the little corner piece that's over there. The one of them got an office condo. So it can get complicated, but there is good data that can help answer that. But I will say it is probably, it's going to be rare that a developer is going to say, here's exactly how much I'm making on it, because it can also, one, I don't think they want to talk about it, but two, sometimes they don't even know until they've exited a deal, and that's the truth. And that's what scares the crap out of most of them. In some cases, they don't know for years. And if,
why don't we ask them what projects they lost money on? There are plenty of those around.
yeah.
I just want to say one other thing, Madam Mayor, if I may. I just don't hear anyone talking about COVID. Every one of these projects, that was 3 lost years. We complain about what happened at Founders Row. It was delayed 3 years. They couldn't negotiate with restaurants. No restaurants were out there doing anything. And then they finally were able to negotiate, and then you got build-out periods and so on. I just think we need to take a step back for a minute and remember that COVID happened, which we've all kind of forgotten, and take into account the fact that there are many factors out there that are unpredictable, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're terrible. Right now, they happen to be terrible. We have developers building when the interest rates are sky high, cost of materials, cost of labor. In my view, it's a miracle that these projects are going on, honestly. And it points to the ability of the developers that have come into the city to be able to hurdle these obstacles.
Right.
So I think we're very fortunate, and there are a lot of good things said tonight and a lot of data that we can collect and understand where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good backdrop. I think along with what kind of Mary Beth talked about, with between our tax rate changing and decreasing and people costs growing, and then Ross talking about the assessment methodology changing, I think it's really hard to do an apples to apples comparison of our pre-development net fiscals with our actuals. But I think it is a great exercise, and thank you, Becky, for keeping us really sophisticated in how we do our decision making here.
Can I just, sorry, Mary Beth.
Just one more thing, and that is on the colorful chart, if you scroll down, Sophie, I mean, the grand total is last year was $4,458,743 into the tax collection. So in the end, that's the final number that is super important. That's the good news.
That's the 9 pennies on the tax rate.
Right. So as it gets aggregated out and different things are the lessons learned, and I think that's super important too, that these numbers, when you look at them this way, give us lessons that we can take into the next project. And I think that's really important too. So we're not going to make the same mistake we made 20 years ago and 15 years ago and 8 years ago. We're going to take all those lessons and make every project better. And the situations change, as we said, but I think, that number there on the bottom left is an important one.
Yep. Let's end on that note then. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for joining us. We're at 10:15. We have the consent to go through. Do folks want a break, or should we just power through?
Legislative update.
Oh, we have a legislative update too. What do y'all think?
Let's just go through it.
You have a bathroom break?
Keep going.
Keep going. Okay.
Keep going.
Let's keep going.
Wyatt or Cindy?
All right, for the legislative item, I have 3 areas. One, the legislative committee is scheduled to meet this Thursday. My recommendation is to defer that and in consultation with the chair propose February 22nd. We can confirm that, but I did want to, while we're all together, talk about deferring that if you concur. The reason is crossover is the 13th. The state House and Senate will finish their budget on the 18th. I don't have much to tell you this Thursday that you didn't hear while we were in Richmond last week. And so the 22nd would be a good time to reconvene if the Ledge Committee would concur with that.
Just a note that I will be out of town that day, but I might be able to join via Teams. I'm not sure.
Cindy, yeah, let's try to.
We'll confirm that, but just.
Make it so that if everybody can be there, that's
Oh,
better.
okay.
So maybe let's exchange.
We can pick a
dates.
different date later, just confirm that we're not meeting this Thursday.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Does any committee member feel that we ought to meet this week? I mean, it's totally up to.
No, I feel
I
comfortable.
think we've all spent a lot of time in Richmond lately, so.
And then earlier this afternoon, I sent out an update on Senate Bill 304, which is the accessory dwelling unit. On the Senate side, it got out of the local government committee on a 8-6 vote. So it is heading to the full floor. It didn't go to study, which there was some push on that, but it does have the amendments that I shared with you from Senator Saleem's negotiation. So we'll keep monitoring that one, but it's pretty consistent where council ended. The one thing that it does provide you that if by July 1, 2025, you adopt your own ordinance on accessory dwelling units, that will supersede any state law as long as it's consistent generally. So it is on your work plan. The question will just be timing. The main item for discussion this evening, since it's late, is House Bill 54, which is the city charter amendment. And it is on the House floor, but for the 8th time, delegate has passed it by for the day as he works on what the votes are to make sure that it gets passed. It is special legislation, so it takes a 2/3 vote. It's not a simple majority. What we heard when we were down in Richmond is that there is interest from the governor already and likely to come up on the Senate side to consider an amendment like you've heard in the past. So this is the 3rd year for this charter bill to shift to 18 of years and reside versus voter qualification. What the governor has floated informally so far is to add the language in there legally in the U.S. So to be on a board and commission serving voluntarily, you'd be 18, reside in the city, and with the governor's amendment, legally in the U.S. So the question, when the legislative committee talked about this just before the Richmond trip, was whether to entertain that concept or not. Delegate Simon will defer to City Council because it is your request for the charter amendment. The Legislative Committee wanted all 7 council members to have the opportunity to voice their thoughts on it and have this in a public meeting, a fuller public meeting. I did ask to have it discussed tonight because by February 13th, there's either going to have to be a vote or it will not cross over. So Delegate Simon will soon need to keep it on the docket for the vote. So there's 2 times this has come up and council has elected to stick to the policy and the philosophy of how you've adopted the resolution. 18, reside in the city. There's a practical consideration that if you were to accept this, the governor probably would not veto it, and you could execute it and make a change, but not the ideal change, and entertain 2 years from now if we wanted to go back and revisit the charter. So the question before council is stick to the way the resolution is or entertain an amendment. Based on your input on that, we will, if it's desired to allow an amendment, we would let Delegate Simon know that, we would probably need to come back and revise the resolution council adopted per our city code so that it's consistent with that amendment. And Chair Snyder, did I summarize the discussion from the
Yeah,
legislative committee?
very well. So we've taken the position that we would not compromise, 2 sessions now? Same issue presented again. On the side of compromise, we're opening up our boards and commissions to military, to foreign nationals, anyone legally in the United States. On the other hand, it's clear that the people on the other side of the political spectrum want to make a statement that we've never wanted to go along with. So, I mean, that's fundamentally the issue. And I'm also a little bit nervous about putting our charter out there and play a lot. I think less so now with this legislature, but I wouldn't want the city's future to be put on the line. But
It is
I don't
very
think
inter-
it is in the context of this legislature.
It is
So
interesting to have a governor looking at our charter.
I don't think
and-
that's a real concern. I think the issue is, are we willing to go to expand the potential members of the boards and commissions significantly? And then, because in order to do that, we have to make this compromise in wording and then come back and address that issue later on, perhaps with a different political environment. I mean, that's the fundamental question. And I think that's why we wanted to bring it to the council.
Good question.
Okay, what do people think?
I have a question, which is, I guess, from everyone here. Do you think it will be harder later? So if we do accept that change, will it be harder, let's say, if we did have a Democratic governor and like full Democratic control of the House and Senate, to change it again to what we want it to be currently? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay.
It's hard to predict that.
I want everybody else to talk first.
I mean, I see,
Process.
we've said for 2 years, we don't want to change that amendment. We like what it says. But the point that if we were to say, yeah, we'll change it, then we would open up boards and commissions more quickly to some of the people that can't be on it. Is that enough? And I'm struggling with that. Is that enough? Do we hold off? So I don't know that that's the first I've thought about it that way. But I kind of feel like we should stick to our guns and say, we'll just wait until we have the opportunity to do it fully. But again, what do other people think?
I'd love to see some change sooner than later, so I want to stick to the guns, but I'm also like to be able to get some incremental progress is not a bad thing. So it gives us the opportunity to do something, right, and get us closer. And it's really hard for me to say no, right? Because we're in a better position to achieve the goal than we are in the past. And I'm leaning towards, and this is the time when I might need to think about it some more. But my leaning is to be like, why not? And why don't we propose an amendment and take the position, knowing we can change, we can adjust it again. And still thinking though.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar place, I think. I understand the concern, and I think it's a valid concern, that Justine raises about, basically you're saying we're going from qualified voters, so U.S. citizens, 18 plus, residing in the city, to 18 plus residing in the city legally in the United States. And you're going to increase to a non-citizen population, and you're losing, solely the subset of undocumented persons, but you're gaining, right, legal permanent residents and basically anyone with even TSP status or TPS status and refugee status and, visa status and student visas and work visas and all, a whole bunch of classes of individuals who, frankly, I think we have a relatively, large group of those people here, who may be interested in serving in boards and commissions and who can't do so right now. And we're looking at this at a time when we have persistent board and commission vacancies. So to me, increasing the candidate pool is an important thing to do. And then there's the practicalities of, who comes forward to serve. I think politically, I understand making the statement and wanting to adhere to what we originally put forward. But when you're talking about, individuals in contacts with government and how often they put themselves into government spaces, I think kind of thinking about whether we lose an opportunity to increase a more fulsome participation across the city as a whole, recognizing that we are committed to being an inclusive environment and allowing participation and encouraging people to show up and have their views heard, that on balance, I think I would support, trying to actually have some change to who it is who can serve on our boards and commissions at this point after 2 tries.
So I'm reluctantly, but in the same position. I think about the families that Welcoming Falls Church, the immigrants, the refugees. I don't like being in this position, and I think we should be very clear about that. But I also think that we greatly expand and serve our values under these circumstances best by trying to deal with the politics right now with a commitment that if things change, we're going to come back and finish the job.
You guys remind me, and this is just because it's 11 o'clock and we've been doing council things for 4 days straight. The refugee status that allows someone to be considered legal versus illegal. Just SIV.
What was the answer?
That doesn't mean anything to me right now.
I'm repeat that in
SIV
full sentence.
sounds like special
You're under
unit
A.
victim. Which makes a difference to me because I am thinking about the Welcoming Falls Church, thinking about people you want in housing. I'm thinking about the people who I want to be able to come and speak about those issues. And I just want to make sure I'm crystal clear on
Whether they're included or not.
Yeah.
I think a question.
It's a little fuzzy in my brain right now, but I seem to recall that's why we held firm the last 2 times was because some of those families wouldn't be allowed to participate. Some of those adults who have amazing world experiences wouldn't have been allowed to participate. But again, I'm just tired right now. So
A question for staff, because I think in the past, the folks who came forward and wanted to serve would be excluded. So staff had data on the number of people who came forward and said, hey, I want to serve on a board and commission, and they were turned away, not have citizenship status.
That's your qualified to vote component. So if you are 18 and reside, your ordinance, your resolution would cover them. Legally in the U.S., I think they would also be covered because they're here legally, because they were either at risk for wherever they were working with the military, and Aaron had said earlier, some of the other visas and students. So I think those examples would be covered even if you agreed to legally in the U.S., because they are legally here. They're just not a citizen, so they can't vote.
They're documented,
Undocumented would not be covered.
So yes, refugees under asylum and are documented would fall under the scope of what we're talking about.
even with the potential amendment
There are
that's
some,
being proposed.
I'm just remembering some specific issue that the length of time it takes to be officially considered a refugee under asylum. You could live here for years before you're given that official status.
Might need an immigration law.
I know, that's,
There could be some examples around that on case by case. It's incremental, as said earlier, to move you forward, but it won't be foolproof with that amended language in there.
and I guess that's what why I'm remembering that we did not change either of the two times, because it was excluding people who had come forward before.
I have the same recollection.
But I can't remember the exact.
That's a bummer.
I mean, that's why we brought it up in the first.
What was it, okay.
We had residents who wanted to serve, and that's why the language was crafted in a way so it would be broader, so that they could serve.
Thanks for bringing that up.
But
Yeah, I
if,
guess I just viewed legally in the United States, legally in the United States is something different than like permanent legal residence, or when you may have to get through your like time period to be able to apply for permanent legal residence, but I don't know enough, and not venturing into.
My recollection was that was why we didn't back off of it, because there was some, but Cindy, you probably remember better than I, of course.
There will be some subsets, and we could do a deeper dive on that, although there's not a lot of time to do that, so
Right.
it's really incremental, and some will not be able to serve, and then, or don't be incremental and stay as you adopted
And how
it.
many charter changes have we requested in the history of Falls Church City?
Let's see, this is.
Smaller than a handful.
4 during my tenure.
Okay, so 4. So let's say
Well,
we
I'll tell
do
you
this with
3 and
a,
this one multiple times.
make it, presuppose that we make this an iterative step. Are we really going to go back and do it again in 2 years? Is it? I don't know. It's something that's pretty
That's a good question.
uncommon.
I guess I see,
Who knows, like, I also, like, 2 years, I mean, I may not be on council, so I feel some obligation to make a statement now for those who have tried to participate in the past. So 2 years from now, someone may have a different opinion if they take my place on council, right? So, I don't know, I'm struggling with that because I feel that I've stayed the same way, and I want to keep it the same way because I wanted to keep everybody available in the process, and we had those who had not been able to participate. But, it's democracy amongst the council too, so if everybody else feels differently.
I hate to do it, but I think we got to come to some kind of a vote because we've got a signal. So.
Have a meeting on the 12th, but that's the day before crossover, so by then, this charter will
We're discussing
either
now, let's just give you the
passed
input
or
now.
failed.
We're discussing now, let's not wait till the 12th, and let's just, I don't want to have to rehash this again on the 12th, so. Do you need, us to raise your hands?
I think everyone's preference is to go with the current. Let me
Yes.
restate it. And I'll make a motion and somebody can second it or nobody can second it. But council's preference is the charter change as submitted. However, under the circumstances, it's been clear that the only way that we can open our boards and commissions to non-voters is with the amendment to exclude those who are not in the United States legally. Therefore, I move that we move forward regrettably with that change so that we can open our boards and commissions to military, foreign nationals, and refugees and others in the country legally.
The question, is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Carolyn?
Yeah.
Do you want to do a roll call vote, Cindy?
If you're ready. Ms. Connolly,
Yes.
Ms. Flynn,
Yes.
Ms. Leon,
Yes.
Ms. Hiscott,
No.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Thunderhill,
Yes.
Mayor Hardy.
No.
That passes on a 5-2 vote. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Appreciate the pragmatic point of view. I think it's just a tough one.
And
I don't want to be here, believe me.
I will pass that on to Delegate Simon. Of course, there's still no guarantee, but we'll
you can
pass
get
it
out of
on
committee.
and we'll revisit whether your local resolution needs to be updated.
And I would just like a note that at least a commitment that I'm making in this moment is when it does seem politically possible to get the one that we want passed, that I will personally be pushing for that.
I'll second that.
We can add that as a note to the discussion of the motion.
Do you have other ledge items you need input on, Cindy?
That is it for this evening.
Let's go from tough to worse.
Or we could go to a little positive movement on our stormwater money, and gas blowers probably aren't getting out of the General Assembly.
We got our stormwater money? Is that what you just said? I didn't hear.
Looking promising. It's moving forward.
We should end there, but I have to, just 1 minute, photo red, or photo speed
cameras.
enforcement. There were 4 bills, 2 of them were exactly the same. They were all heard in this ad hoc committee. Every speaker representing Albemarle County, Arlington, City of Falls Church, VML, VACO, safety groups, people who had lost relatives, people that had been injured in motor vehicle crashes as a result of speeding. Plus all of our citizens, thank you, Letty, and others for organizing them, who were online and submitted comments. When they called for any opposition, there were no opposition speakers except one delegate who claimed that the courts would throw it out because we're taking photographs of cars or license plates or whatever, which, like, I think is a bizarre, legal argument. But that was the only one, and the motion was to basically table it until 2025, just right out of the blue. And I'm sure there's a backstory, but it's one of these issues where it's not just property, it's not just money, it's lives, and there will be lives lost as a result of this. So, anyway, that's the issue.
Can we move on quickly to the consent packet? Looks like there are a lot of things up for consent, 6 next week. Do people have questions for Wyatt and Cindy on those?
I had one question on the first one. So on Shreve Road, there was a note about the VDOT right-of-way and, possible liability to the city. So that piece, but then if there were to be redevelopment that were to occur there, are we liable in the same sort of way if whatever the improvements are disturbed? Or?
I think we're viewing the risk, and we wanted to highlight it, that we don't have control over this road, a big chunk of it. And so VDOT could unilaterally take the shared use path out, and by the letter of the agreement, we'd be responsible to reimburse the NVTA. Sally is trying to address this, but the NVTA has a standard agreement that is sort of based on the General Assembly's rules, and so they've not been willing to change it. We think it's a kind of a minor, it's not likely that VDOT would do that, but we've been trying to solve for this problem, so we don't like taking on obligations like this. But we haven't been able to solve it yet.
I bet there's tons of other projects where you have NVTA money on VDOT roads, and,
Yeah.
and how do other people deal with it elsewhere, right?
NVTA staff have sort of minimized their concerns.
Okay.
It's unusual for us, but I think for Fairfax County.
I mean, it's all VDOT roads there, right? So I assume.
So.
On this topic, will the plans come to us? Are they just going to come to you? Will they go to CAC? Will we have any say in how the design happens?
we will work collaboratively with Fairfax County. The concept is pretty simple and is pretty well defined in the grant agreement, so we don't think there's going to be like some curveball that like, whoa, this isn't what we wanted at all. We've been working quite well with the Fairfax County staff on this, so we feel very confident that we're going to get what we want. Now, explicitly, does the council vote to approve the final plans? I don't think so.
I mean, is it something that you can keep us in the loop on? And if we have major concerns, could you convey that to, okay.
And I just have one question on this also. In light of the Bike Master Plan conversation about a safe route to the secondary school, one of the things that we've struggled with is that because this goes into Fairfax County, our police have said it can't be officially the safe route to school because we can't tell our students to go out of the City of Falls Church and back in on their way to school.
The police said it.
Yes,
Oh.
they did in a safe routes to school conversation.
How would they get to Mount Daniel? Like,
Well, there's not a safe route to school to Mount Daniel. But the conversation was, we can't tell them to go out of the city of Falls because the police don't have jurisdiction over that area so if something happened,
Yeah, I don't understand that concern. Let me find out a little bit.
find out because it would be a great safe route to school
Glad you
to be
raised
able
it,
to tell kids to do that. But it was when we were doing the walking routes that are there right now and Officer Rouse said our police couldn't respond if they were called out of the city.
but don't we
And kids
pursue?
had a
Like, if
problem.
it crosses jurisdiction lines, we keep pursuing. It's not like we stop at the border and be like, oh,
Yeah, but suppose there was a bike accident or something happened on the bike path and it was in Fairfax County. It just, he was under the impression at that point that it would be more difficult to respond because our kids were outside of.
I appreciate you raising it. I had not heard that concern before, so I'll follow.
Okay, thanks.
other questions on consent stuff? Besides Shreve Road?
Move to pat, oh no, there's no.
We're just talking about it.
Discuss, just.
You're ready to go.
Any questions will be duly noted and we will.
Yeah, we had to move to refer it to.
Yeah, I had ones on the CCAU, the Affordable Housing Fund recommendations. I did not see how long the 370,000 would last for these 10 or 12 units. Is that in the report?
3 years, I think.
3 years. And so it's funny, we were just having some email exchanges on this. We do want the staff report, and I think even in the whereas to be explicit about that 3-year funding.
Yeah.
And then what the council, I think, should expect in FY25 is that we will fund the 4th year so that if there's ever a financial crisis, people are depending on us for this aid, we would have 3 years to adjust as opposed to putting people in a bind. Really.
Yeah.
And so that's the thought process.
That's where I was going with it, is what
Yes.
sort of commitment should we make for that?
So we'll make that explicit in the staff.
Okay.
And it would be a $150,000 a year commitment, or what's the commitment per year? Would that be 150,000 at least? Okay.
Well, the annual appropriation's 120.
120, I think, actually, is it.
Is what it is right now.
Council currently does 100,000 to the Affordable Housing Fund. So we're going to sort of, when we're talking full budget, we'll sort of see how all these numbers work.
I think the report said the estimate was 138 for the 12 units for the yearly projection.
It's confusing, Wyatt. You've got two numbers
Yeah,
here.
'cause it
The
says a
request
120
120 and 350. I think you just
It's a
clean up-
one-time budget amendment.
Yeah,
we'll
so
get that clarified.
the language, the repetitive versus the one time.
And then relatedly, like, I think we had talked about converting 60% units, so not using any more 60% units, so that those still get freed up. And I think even in this plan, 2 out of the 12 are still 60% AMI units. 'Cause those are in high demand, as are 30 to 50% AMI units. And so I guess I'd like to know what would it cost if we wanted to convert the remaining to 60% and free those back up as part of our other ADU stock. This whole effort came about when we realized that we were essentially buying down 60% units and taking up 60% units, which are in high demand. And we said, well, gosh, you should go out and just buy down market rate rent instead, because we're adding a net positive 12 units. And I went back and looked up, we have 202 total ADUs right now in our total portfolio. And this is adding 12, so that's a big deal. It's like a 6% increase. So from our bang, from our buck perspective, it's pretty efficient use of dollars.
We'll note that Ms. Mark is on this call, and I don't know if you have any.
Thanks for hanging with us so late.
To these questions.
Hi, everyone. No problem. Should I I know you guys have already been going through, but good evening, Mayor and council members. Good evening, everyone. Should I go through the whole presentation? Because I know you started going through the staff report. Okay.
So Dana and Kayleen, consent items, you don't need to be here for these meetings. And Dana, I've told you that many times, but it's great to see you all. And I know you all care very much about this program, so that's why you're here. But there were just a few questions. Certainly you don't need to go through the full presentation, but any response to specific questions?
She can definitely answer those questions.
Sure.
Hi, Vice Chair of the Housing Commission joined us too. Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah.
He's here to show support because they're making the recommendation.
So I can answer any questions that you may have in regards to the funds or, how we are going to be spending down the funds. So we estimate that the project per year would be about $140,000 to $150,000. It's difficult to have a specific cost because we are going to be going through households that are 30 to 50% AMI, which their rents will be determined based on what AMI level they fall on, and also the fact that we are using market rate units and the prices go up and down. So we would not know the exact cost until we actually get a client selected for the unit and approved for the program.
Got it.
It's a range. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on the 6 consent items?
C, where we're going to appoint someone to the affordable living policy
Work group.
yes.
2 people, one and an alternate, right?
Do we know who are they going to be? How are we going to figure that out?
Who would like to do it? Figure it out now.
Council person. You mean who on the?
We have to appoint 2 council members to serve on the affordable living work group.
So when we last did this 5 years ago, I think we specifically chose like you and Ross, I think, to not be.
Ross and I did it, right?
Because I was liaison. I was like, I don't need to be part of it so that
Right.
I would get briefed on it anyway. So that was one strategy is to.
Right.
So who's has an interest in affordable living?
I do.
Caroline? Do we have an alternate?
You're not going to need an alternate. Right? When you say alternate, it literally means.
I think that's what it said, is alternate, right?
It says alternate.
Yeah, it was not 2 members, it was alternate.
Yeah. I'd be happy to be your alternate.
Okay.
Just show up. No.
And staff note that for the appointment for the.
Can I ask one question not related to that piece of it, but when I looked at the old affordable living policy, or I guess it was in the staff report, who is on there it is, the people who are appointed to this work group, is there a reason that there's like no school representation on this work group? Like I would think that the schools have some interest in also thinking about like the affordable living policy where, what our commitment
and
are to
teachers.
students and teachers, yeah.
There was one in the one 5 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
We did. We had someone, a teacher, 2 people actually the last time. Mary Beth counted as a schools as well, but we can add that to the list if you would like.
I think it just makes sense, yeah, especially with
Yeah,
like
that's a good
units
idea.
expiring and everything. So, yeah. It would be great if we have someone participate from them.
So
Okay.
on that note, is anybody dropped off from 5 years ago that we should add in addition to schools? I'm just curious if this.
There were some
this
other
is a-
community members too.
Yes,
I
who
remember,
was-
maybe that's who the school person was, that we had 3 or 4 community members who served, and one of them was a teacher.
Yeah, I mean, you could say like, is there a benefit to having like a condo owner or a townhouse owner? Like, do you want different sort of unit mix representation? I mean,
I think we're pretty.
the tenant was because of the historic underrepresentation of like the tenant among probably other participants in this list. But anyway, so that was just, kind of as I looked at it. Food for thought for
I
the
think-
working group.
I think I just remember part of the Housing Commission discussion was that, we didn't want a list of like 20 people. We wanted to keep it so that, there was enough time for people to speak and actually get things done. And so, we could expand the list, but, trying to figure out how to pare things down was also part of the goal.
Right. Well, I think we can still keep it tight, but add a schools member.
Okay. So suggestion to add the schools, and then we've got Caroline and Debbie, thank you. Okay, anything else on consent?
Yes. For the, let me just get it up. For the rules of procedure, this is just something small. On line 325, we say shorten or extend. And so I just want to make sure that that matches up with line 259. It says, oh wait. Sorry, maybe, oh no, excuse me, it's line 241, shorten or extend, just so that it matches.
221.
Sorry, I can say the lines again.
It's 241, not 221.
It was 325 is where we say or extend, and it should just match up with 241.
Yep.
Shorten or extend.
Justine, you're getting nominated to review all the
Oh
minutes.
gosh.
now.
Yeah, I know. Right now. I'd officially just put you into the category of minutes.
Madam Mayor, I had one question, and I'm not going to try to take the position that Justine has just been volunteered for. But the one where we talk about material request to the city manager, I don't know what we're saying with material. I think we mean substantive. So it's something other than like, what's this or what's, date, but rather, I think it's substantive is the word you want for that. I thought the rules of procedure were pretty good.
Yeah.
So.
Where, material, what does
Yeah.
material mean? That's good.
All right, the draft you see, we'll have that changed. Your change.
Anything else on rules or the other 6 items on consent? Alrighty, we're gonna consider that done then. Anything on the schedule before Wednesday, Wyatt, to note, or can we adjourn?
Don't have any updates on schedule at this moment.
So Wednesday, we have the mayor's meeting, and then we have Ask the Council office hours right after that, 9, for those who can join.
And I just want to remind everyone to take a look at the school board budget page. There are some questions and answers on there to get yourselves up to speed. They have a work session tomorrow night as well.
Have they assigned us budget buddies?
Not that I don't
that
know.
I know of.
I haven't
Yeah.
seen such.
Definitely
yeah.
entice at the choir concert and that.
Okay.
But there's some reasonable questions and answers that will be helpful.
So there's version 2 of that.
I think there's a version 2, yeah. Or they're
Because I
just
read the
they're
first
they're
one.
adding on.
Because I had the first
Yeah.
version.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. That's it.
Okay. Anything else, or are we done?
We'll have a written report from the council's retreat.
Yes.
Christy's going to draft up the report on Wednesday, and so we'll share that when we get it.
Great.
But just really appreciated the positive energy and the hard work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciated the poster because it worked. Caroline wanted it.
Yeah, they did.
Excellent.
Well, thank you all for a lot of togetherness over the past several days. More to come on Wednesday. Alrighty. Good night, all.
Good night.
We'll be able
Dave,
to get to sleep earlier tonight with the lights.
I was already ready.